Chapter 230. Bang! He punched the tree trunk with one hand and held two pieces of cloth in the other. The head of the entourage was so angry that his liver was about to explode. Meng Hun, you've gone too far. He clenched his teeth in anger. He thought he could catch Meng Hun, but Meng Hun was still toying with him. Meng Hun only gave them directions to walk around in circles. It was like a monkey's show. If I catch you, I'll tear you to pieces. The old hunter who was leading the way was trembling in fear. His back was covered in sweat and he shivered in the cold night wind. Sir, are we still going? The old hunter asked carefully after the man had finished punching the tree. No. Let's go back. They're trying to lure us away. They want to take the rations away while I'm not here. Hee, I'm afraid they'll never know that I left someone to guard the rations. Meng Hun is just a stray dog. How can he swallow so much? He must be scared of choking to death. His eyes darkened and a murderous look flashed in his eyes. He didn't even need to think to know that if he kept searching, he would only find more pieces of cloth. It was an obvious trick to lure them away. The purpose was to buy time so that they could take the rations away. Let's go back and surround Meng Hun. At the order of the head of the entourage, the exhausted soldiers pulled themselves together and hurried on with their sore legs. The old hunter was confused. He was only hired to lead the way. How would he know what was going on with the soldiers? He just needed to lead the way. When he got the promised money, he would never do such a thankless job again. The old hunter muttered to himself as he moved through the forest. He was as strong as a young man in his 20s. As a veteran hunter who had been hunting nearby for more than 30 years, he could move freely even with his eyes closed. He knew when to step and where to step. He knew it would be easier for him to do so. But it was not so easy for the soldiers. The route Jiang Pengji chose seemed to be smooth and without any traps, but it was full of hidden traps. It was very exhausting. The old hunter was already used to it, so naturally he did not feel anything. On the other hand, the soldiers were traveling at night, and the terrain was so rough. How could they not be exhausted? The head of the entourage was eager to kill Meng Hun to avenge himself, so he kept urging them to hurry up. One of the soldiers panted and jogged, "Boss, don't worry. Meng Hun definitely won't expect us to come back." That's right. With so much food, even if 400 people carried it, it would still take at least an hour. How could they move fast if they were carrying the food? Even if we can't catch them, we can still catch up to them. Leader, you don't have to be so anxious. Let us rest first. Hearing that, the head of the entourage's face darkened. He raised his hand and whipped the soldier. The man let out a blood-curdling scream as a long line of blood ran diagonally from one side of his forehead to the other side of his chin. He missed his footing and fell to the ground, rolling down the slope. There was a dull thud from below, and in an instant, there was no more sound. The head of the entourage showed no mercy at all. Instead, he said in a sinister tone, "Speed is the most important thing in war. How can we waste our time for such a reason? Meng Hun is a cunning man. Who knows what other tricks he has up his sleeve? Anyone who wants to rest will end up like him." The other soldiers kept quiet out of fear. They just lowered their heads and held their breaths, afraid that they would be whipped if they breathed too loudly. The head of the entourage snorted and said proudly, "Since no one objects, let's continue our journey and capture Meng Hun alive. As long as we capture Meng Hun and make a great contribution, I'll ask the county chief to reward you. Then you'll have a meteoric rise. You'll have money, women, and status." Tempted by the benefits, the other soldiers forgot about the rising fear in their hearts and suddenly felt a sense of heroism. After a while, the bandit stockade could be seen with the naked eye. There was still light over there. The head of the entourage laughed when he saw it. Pointing at the fire in the stockade, he said, "Meng Hun is such an idiot. He's trying to lure us away and buy time. He didn't expect that I had a trick up my sleeves. I left some people to guard the food. It's not that easy to get the food. If you want to take it, take your life. Seeing the bandit stockade getting closer and closer, the head of the entourage felt excited. He smelled blood in the air, which made him even more overjoyed. Obviously, this was the evidence that Meng Hun had led his men to launch a sneak attack. Maybe he was already wounded and had fled. The old hunter suddenly felt extremely uncomfortable when he was only 100 meters away from the stockade, as if a terrible beast was targeting his vital parts. This kind of vigilance had saved him many times in danger, and this time the feeling was stronger than ever. He stopped for a moment and suddenly bent over and rolled over. The old hunter felt that his hands and feet were numb and weak in panic, as if he would lose his life if he slowed down a bit. His action was so sudden that the head of the entourage came back to himself from his extreme excitement and became serious. "What are you doing?" As soon as he finished speaking, a strange sound came from the back of the troop. Screams kept coming from the back. The exhausted soldiers fell one after another, like rice being cut, one after another. The head of the entourage was frightened by the sudden change. All he could see was darkness. He could not see the enemy at all. It was as if the deadly arrows had come out of nowhere. After only 3 volleys of arrows, only 20 to 30 of his soldiers were left. The rest had been turned into porcupines. TSK. Cowards. The Mengs keep using such useless people. What a disgrace to Lord Meng. Jiang Pengji squatted on a branch. She wanted to shoot some arrows at the head of the entourage, but she did not expect him to be so cruel that he grabbed the corpses and used them as meat shields. A few stray arrows hit the corpses. TSK, TSK. It was rare to see someone so useless. Qiguan Rank's night vision was not that good. He heard Jiang Pengji's sarcasm and thought she was belittling the enemy. Jiang Pengji patted the trunk of the tree, which made a cracking sound. The troops heard the sound and put their hands to their mouths. They shouted, "Meng Gongyong of the previous dynasty is ridiculous." Qiguan Rank's heart sank. He was frightened by their thunderous voices. The descendants of today are worse than dogs. Someone's feather fan almost fell to the ground. Was it really okay to mock them so blatantly? At that moment, Qiguan Rang could not help but think of the coarse cloth Jiang Pengji left behind. It directly called the Mengs dogs. Jiang Pengji said to Qiguan Rang in distress, "I don't think it sounds imposing. Should I say something more infuriating?" Qiguan Rang was speechless. Wasn't that infuriating? If it were him, his brain would explode. Chapter 231. 232, Spitting Blood, 1. The big streaming room was full of talented people. For the first time, Jiang Pengji felt that the audience in the streaming room was not completely useless. At least they were good at swearing. Qiguan Rang was dumbfounded. He had never thought that the elegant aristocratic son of the aristocratic family would actually swear. Even though, he felt good when he heard it. He had never thought that Lu Shi would be such a Lang Jun. Qiguan Rang felt that he had opened the door to a whole new world. His troops shouted the same sentence in unison. Their voices echoed all over the mountain. The head of the entourage felt a sharp pain in his heart when he heard it. He almost choked on his breath. He looked at the dead bodies lying on the ground. His vision darkened. He staggered and almost fell on his butt. The old hunter crawled out of his hiding place. He did not dare to look back. His clothes were stained with the soldier's blood. The sticky and warm feeling on his hands scared him out of his wits. His face was as pale as paper. He crawled away on all fours. The reward for leading the way was tempting, but how could it compare to his own life? It would be a waste if he did not have the life to spend the money. He decided that he would never do such a dangerous job again. The head of the entourage was a man who cherished his life. Staying outside was not as safe as staying in the bandit village. At least there were buildings and shelters in the village to protect him from the arrows. However, when he and his subordinates left the dead bodies on the ground and arrived at the brightly lit bandit village, they were all shocked by the bloody scene inside. There were many more dead bodies than outside, and there were several arrows stuck in each of them. Some of the fatal wounds were not from the arrows, but they were still dead. They must have been killed after the battle. The head of the entourage, who had never cared about human lives, was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He could not say a word. Chief. Chief. That looks like. Second Lang Jun, an injured soldier, was so scared that his legs were trembling. He pointed at a greenish-black corpse that emitted a strange aura with a trembling finger. What? The head of the entourage suddenly came to his senses. He quickly crawled toward the corpse. The corpse was very cold and hard. It gave off a rotten smell, but the face was still recognizable. At this moment, he finally understood why Meng Hun and his gang shouted, "The descendants lost their son and their food." Meng Liang's Lang Jun had already been killed. Touching the body, he felt like a piece of meat that had been frozen in an ice cellar. His heart sank deeper and deeper. Just by looking at the condition of the body, he could guess that Meng Liang had not been killed in the past few days. It was highly likely that he had already been killed when he was captured by Meng Hun. At this thought, the head of the entourage was so scared that his mind went blank. He felt a stabbing pain in his heart and spat out a mouthful of blood, but he swallowed it back. However, the matter that stimulated his nerves was not over yet. "Leader, there's no more food." The bandits' stronghold was empty, and there was no trace of the mountain-like grain bags. The head of the entourage could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His eyelids rolled and he passed out. How could he not vomit blood? How could he not pass out from anger? Meng Liang had been killed a long time ago, but Meng Hun had created the illusion that Meng Liang was still alive and cheated the Mengs of their food. After taking the food, he made up those humiliating words. It was as if he was afraid that people would not know that he had killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of their food. Meng Liang had killed his wife and daughter, so he took revenge. He killed Meng Liang and cheated the Mengs of 3,000 dawn of food. The Mengs were proud of that, but he just stood there and watched like a monkey show. He must have secretly mocked the Mengs for being as stupid as pigs. This was really a loss of a son and a loss of food. That was so frustrating. "Do you feel good now?" On the other side, Jiang Pengji was riding high. "How can I not feel good?" Meng Hun was so excited that his hands were shaking. He knelt on the ground and his strong body yielded to her. "From now on, my life belongs to you, Lang Jun. You've given me a new life. You're like a second parent to me. In this life, I'm only willing to be at your beck and call. Even if you want my life, I'll do it without hesitation." Jiang Pengji stopped smiling and did not help him up. Instead, she said something meaningful. "Remember your vow. Remember your vow today. No matter what happens, I hope your loyalty will not change." Although it was convenient to be a man, Jiang Pengji did not want to keep it a secret. One day, she would openly tell the world that Lu Shi was a proper woman, and not a legitimate child of the Lu family. People treated men and women differently. Men might be praised for doing the same thing, but women would be criticized for doing it. Jiang Pengji was very curious. If Meng Hun knew she was a woman, would he still be loyal to her? Meng Hun said firmly, "If I break my vow, I'll be struck by lightning. Get up. It's cold on the ground." Jiang Pengji smiled and helped Meng Hun up. "Yes, it feels good. But have you thought about what to do after that?" Qiguan Rang, who was watching from the side, poured cold water on Meng Hun. "Since I dared to do this, I've already thought of a way out. I'll only leave some people in the farm and the rest will pretend to be bandits. They'll clean up the bandits and recruit useful bandits to expand the size of the troop." Jiang Pengji said calmly, "There are many bandits in the mountains in Hejin County. Even the government can't do anything about them. With this disguise, it'll be much easier to hide. The Mengs may send troops to retaliate." Qiguan Rang suddenly stopped. All the crimes were on Meng Hun's head. Even if the Mangs wanted to retaliate, they would dig deep to find Meng Hun, not the bandits in Hejin County. Meng Hun was not so kind as to go all the way to Hejin County to suppress bandits and increase the achievements of the Hejin County chief. TSK, so be it. No fool would stay in the same place after stirring up trouble. Jiang Pengji said indifferently, in 2 days, when the situation is less tense, I plan to let Meng Hun leave Hejin County and escape to other places to divert the Meng's attention. We haven't even dealt with the mess in Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. Where will we find so many troops to avenge our son? It was already a troubled time. The Meng still had a lot of problems to deal with. How could they want to find her? She would leave Hejin County in 2 or 3 months. If they could find her, she would admit defeat. Are we just going to leave the grain? Qiguan Rang asked. As for the grain, we'll store it in the cellar. I'll send someone to keep an eye on it. The most dangerous place is the safest. Those idiots all think that Meng Hun and his men have moved the grain away. Who would have thought that the grain was only moved from the surface to the underground? Chapter 232. Something bad happened. At dawn, the county chief of Hejin County was woken up by his servants from his bed. The county chief got up from his bed with sleepy eyes. What are you yelling for? You sleep first. I'll go and see what happened. The county chief's beloved concubine was also disturbed. She said in a coquettish tone, Master. It's not even dawn yet, something must have happened. The county chief of Hejin County was also angry. Anyone who was woken up from a sweet dream would be angry, not to mention the county chief of Hejin County, who had been living like a prince for many years. Gradually, he became a little angry in bed. He lifted the quilt, grabbed his clothes with one hand, and hurriedly went out. When he heard the servant's report, his remaining sleepiness disappeared instantly. He was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. What did you say? Say it again. Who did you say died? The Hejin County chief's eyes were wide open like a pair of copper bells. His face was full of shock. He spoke so fast that his tongue could be twisted. What happened last night? Tell me in detail. The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's collar and pulled him towards himself. The servant was so scared that he was trembling all over. As they were too close, the warm breath from the satrap's mouth hit his face. The servant became more nervous and repeated what he had just said, Master. Master. Something big happened yesterday. It is said that the Langjun of the Mengs in Sangzhou was poisoned by someone. The county chief of Hejin County was also stunned. He wished that it was just a nightmare and not the bad news he was hearing. Who is the Langjun of the Mengs in Sangzhou? If the Langjun of the Mengs was in trouble in Hejin County, he wouldn't be too worried. However, he had a bad feeling. He was afraid that the Langjun was an important figure in the Mengs. What is his identity? The servant gasped and said with difficulty, it was said that the Langjun of the Mengs was the second son of the Mengs. His name is Meng Liang. The second son of the Mengs. Hearing these 3 words was like a clap of thunder, directly causing him to be stunned on the spot. His legs went limp, and he actually lost his composure and sat on the ground. Laleoi. Are you all right? The servant was already afraid, and seeing the pillar of the family lose his composure, he became even more flustered. Help me up. The Hejin County chief grabbed the servant's arm and stood up. At this moment, his mind was completely muddled. He deeply felt that his luck was terrible this year. What kind of Taisui did he offend? If not, why did the noblewoman of Hejin County almost die a few days ago, and now the second son of the Meng family was murdered? Master, what should we do now? The servant still remembered the scene a month ago when the head of the entourage broke into the city gate with his men and killed people. He didn't take the Hejin County chief seriously because he had a strong backer. If the Mengs want to make a fuss about it, I'm afraid, even though Meng Liang wasn't killed by the Hejin County chief, it was still someone who got into trouble in his territory. It was highly possible that the Meng family would implicate him in a fit of anger. The county chief of Hejin County was pulled back to reality by Meng Qi's words. He pulled himself together and pretended to be calm. What are you afraid of? I'm a righteous man. The disciple of the Meng family came to Hejin County without receiving any news. Can you blame me if something happens to him? Although he said so, the Hejin County chief wasn't confident that he wouldn't be implicated. In a panic, he just wanted to find someone to give him some advice. Suddenly, he thought of Lu Shi. He slapped his thigh and said loudly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to the Lu mansion." The servant nodded and said, "I'm going to prepare it now." But he didn't take 2 steps before he turned back. "Master, please forgive me. I almost forgot something else." The Hejin County chief asked impatiently, "What else is there? Say it in one breath. Don't waste time." The servant answered, "Yesterday, the guards at the city gate reported that there was a suspicious grain team." The Hejin County chief asked, "Are you saying that the grain team is the thief who killed Meng Liang?" "No. An old hunter came to the yamen this morning and got a shocking news. The grain that the grain team was escorting was prepared by the Mengs to exchange for Meng Liang with the thief. But the thief was vicious. He killed Meng Liang early and tricked the Mengs into sending the grain. The old hunter said that there was a bloody battle in the mountains last night. Half of the grain team was killed by the thief. There were only 20 or 30 soldiers left. They are all in the yamen now." The servant told the story without taking a breath. The county chief of Hejin County was stunned. He was shocked by the first news, but he had mixed feelings about the second news. He didn't like the Meng style, but he didn't expect the thief to be so bold. They killed people and cheated them of the grain. The Hejin County chief thought for a while and said, "Go to the yamen first, and then to the Lu mansion. Send someone to send the visiting card to the Lu County chief." It seemed like a peaceful day, but there was an undercurrent brewing in the dark that affected the pulse of Dongqing. The common people didn't notice it, but those who were well-informed reacted. The survivors of the grain team were all from the Mengs, so they were tight-lipped. But there was also an old hunter who escaped from death. He didn't have a high level of awareness, so he didn't keep his mouth shut. With a little coercion and a little temptation, he would spill everything. Of course, it included the 2 sentences that the troops said to ridicule the Mengs. It was ridiculous that Meng Gongyong of the previous dynasty said that his descendants were worse than dogs. And the second sentence, which was even more infuriating, said that Meng Gongyong killed the enemy and brought peace to the world, but his descendants lost their children and grain. Even a blind man could tell that the culprit who kidnapped and murdered Meng Liang was trying to humiliate the Mengs. Because of the fear of the Mengs, people didn't dare to say it out loud. But they despised the thief in their hearts. They were one of the 4 noble families of Dongqing, but now they were being ridiculed by the thief. Thinking about how brave Meng Gongyong was in the past, it was sad that his descendants had come to this. For a while, the 2 sentences spread among the people as if they had wings. No matter what era the people were in, they were always interested in gossip. Their love for fun had never changed. Before the Hejin County chief came to visit, Lu Shi had heard several versions of the story. He was speechless. He knew who did it and he was mentally prepared. But when he heard the news, he was still touched. "Give me some advice. If even you can't do anything, the arrogant Mengs won't let me go." The Hejin County chief was so anxious that his mouth was bubbling. Lu Shi smiled and shook his head. He elegantly poured a cup of tea for the Hejin County chief and said slowly. Chapter 233. The Hejin County chief thought it made sense. 2, but he was only a county chief in name only. How could he have so many soldiers to catch the bandits? Just taking care of the guards in the county governor manor who were just there to keep up appearances was already a stretch for him. He sighed and said shamefully, "Brother Lu, you don't know. Even though I have the title of a county chief, I can't be compared to you." Without any real power in their hands, they had neither food nor manpower. How could they eliminate the bandits around them? How can I let the people live and work in peace? I have the heart, but I can't do anything to those bandits. If there were people with food, why would they let the bandits grow and disturb the people? He also had great ambitions. He wanted to be a good county chief and work for the people. However, there were too many powerful Buddhas in Hejin County. As a powerless county chief, he could only be an obedient mute and retire peacefully. In the past, he had tried to gather people to suppress the bandits, but at that time, the bandits had already become very powerful and could not be mobilized. Lu Shi sighed helplessly. He seemed to sympathize with his old classmate. After a while, Lu Shi hesitated and said, "You and I have known each other for a long time and we are classmates. I can't just watch you being attacked by the Mengs and ignore it. The only way out is to catch the bandits who killed Meng Langjun. If you lack manpower, why don't you borrow some people from other families in the name of suppressing the bandits for the people? It's fine if no one gives you some food." The county chief of Hejin County looked embarrassed. This solution could solve the urgent situation, but he would lose face. The families that Lu Shi mentioned were the other gentry families in Hejin County. The county chief felt like he was begging for money. Seeing the county chief hesitate, Lu Shi said righteously, "My family doesn't have many resources. Even though we have some property, we are only the second branch. We can't take over the family, so there's a limit to what we can do. If you don't mind, I'm willing to give you 100 servants to help you suppress the bandits." The gentry families were big and had many servants. But the number of servants to guard the house was fixed and the number was fixed. After all, it didn't take too many people to look after the house. If there were too many, it would be equivalent to raising another mouth to eat without doing anything. Under normal circumstances, if the Hejin County chief went out to borrow people from other families, he wouldn't be able to borrow many. Of course, the wealthy families that secretly raised private armies were an exception. 100 people was a huge number and a generous one. How could the Hejin County chief not be shocked? Even the previous few times when they were suppressing the bandits, they only mobilized 100 or 200 soldiers. The county chief of Hejin County calmed down and relaxed his frown. If it weren't for the inappropriate situation, he would have laughed out loud. "Brother, you've really helped me a lot. Regardless of whether we can catch those thieves or not, I will owe you a big favor." Lu Shi also broke into a smile and said a few words humbly. He looked like he was doing it for the sake of brotherhood. The Hejin County chief naturally had to return the favor after receiving such a big favor. The 100 people were like 100 mouths. The Lus had already sent people, they couldn't ask them to give back food. Therefore, he decided to pay a visit to the other landowning households later and ask them if they could give him some food or not. After all, to these landowning households, people were more valuable than food. Anything that could be solved with food was nothing. Training servants required energy, money, and material resources. If the people they lent out were lost, they would suffer a great loss. In comparison, it was more cost-effective to send people off with a batch of food. With Lu Shi taking the lead, the other families couldn't be too stingy. They would more or less give some food. Although it was a bit embarrassing, it was worth it if they could get through this crisis. The Hejin County chief felt better when he thought about it. After Jiang Pengji finished dealing with the follow-up matters, she received a message from the gatekeeper asking her to see Lu Shi. "Father, what can I do for you?" Jiang Pengji was a bit confused. Lu Shi wouldn't scold her because of what happened last night, would he? "Father has found a few free suckers for you." Jiang Pengji was confused. "What suckers?" Lu Shi smiled and took a sip of tea. He told her about the visit from the Hejin County chief. "You should have 100 people in your troops, right? If you are willing, you can lend them to the Hejin County chief. He will be in charge of the troops, but you can make all the decisions secretly. You can divide the spoils of war. As for the captured bandits, I will talk to him and give him a clear path." Jiang Pengji had secretly suppressed the bandits and recruited usable bandits into the troops. It was a good idea, but it was not a good way to explain if they were discovered. Lu Shi wanted to use this opportunity to give her a clear path and get a call from the Hejin County chief. Of course, the 100 people belonged to his daughter, so it was not appropriate for Lu Shi to make the decision for her. If Jiang Pengji was not willing, Lu Shi planned to send 100 people from his guards to the Hejin County chief. Jiang Pengji listened and thought about it carefully. She was a bit tempted. Giving her a clear path was only one of the benefits. The other was that during the suppression of the bandits, all the expenses of the troops would be paid by the public account. What did it mean by paying the public account? The chief of Hejin County collected food from various aristocratic families and used it all to feed Jiang Pengji's troops. Jiang Pengji didn't have to spend a single cent. Although some of the spoils of war would be taken by the chief of Hejin County, she had more choices about the captured bandits and even other benefits. In layman's terms, it was using other people's money to feed one's own troops. There were many gentry families in Hejin, so they had more money and food. No matter how stingy those people were, they would pay a little for the sake of their reputation. The total amount of food was very considerable. Jiang Pengji felt that they could eat some of it and carry some of it away. Of course. After all, the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages. The bandits near Hejin must be eliminated. In the past, we could only do it secretly. Now we have a good reason to do it, and there will be people who will pay for the expenses. Wouldn't it be unfair to myself if I don't accept such a good offer? It was not easy to start from scratch. One would not know the cost of food if one did not manage the household. The scale of the troops was still small. When the number of people reached thousands or even tens of thousands, she would not be able to feed so many people with her current wealth. Therefore, it was very important to increase income and reduce expenditure. Lu Shi's move helped her solve a problem and saved her a lot of expenses. He pressed his lips together as if he wanted to suppress the smile on his face, but the gentle smile in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. Since you have agreed, I will inform the Hejin County chief tomorrow. Lu Shi paused and then asked in a low voice, have you cleaned up the aftermath of the incident with Meng Liang? Father, don't worry. It has been done, Jiang Pengji answered with certainty. The father and son looked at each other and smiled. They both saw the slyness in each other's eyes. At that moment, the news of Meng Liang, the second son of the Mengs, being murdered spread like wildfire. Chapter 234. 235, Spitting Blood. 4. The Hejin County chief put aside his pride and collected more than 1,000 don of food and various weapons. As he had expected, no one except Lu Shi was willing to give them to others. They chose to pay with money. He thought that Lu Shi's men were the elites he had raised in Hu County, so he was very confident about killing the bandits. He organized the money into a booklet and handed it to Lu Shi with both hands. He also told Lu Shi that he was not good at dispatching and hoped that Lu Shi would pay more attention to him. After all, they were Lu Shi's soldiers. Although Lu Shi said that he would lend them to him, it was not appropriate for the Hejin County chief to interfere. Of course, Lu Shi wouldn't refuse the supplies that were delivered to his doorstep. He politely declined them and accepted them under the urging of the Hejin County chief. With a turn of his head, he handed them over to his daughter. Jiang Pengji was speechless. She had only lied to them and a lot of food and money had been delivered to her. She finally understood why the Lus were so rich. Lu Shi did not see through her thoughts. She hinted, the Hejin County chief can't eat or sleep well. He is eager to see the bandits killed. Jiang Pengji's heart skipped a beat. She understood the meaning of his words and nodded in response. Father, don't worry. I know what to do. They had to kill the bandits, but she had the final say on who to kill. She just needed to show a good record. The Hejin County chief would probably be grateful and think that Lu Shi was a good friend and that Lu Shi was a hero. Anyway, the father and son would take all the material and reputation benefits. Others would be happy even if they suffered a loss. Lu Shi was worried. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. The tallest tree on the shore will be destroyed by the current. People are stupid. Those who are outstanding are easy to be envied and criticized. As your father, I don't want you to suffer such grievances. Therefore, when necessary, Lanting can keep a low profile and avoid the limelight of others' fights. You should focus on the result. There is no need to fight for a temporary victory. Others did not know about her future, but Lu Shi knew her ambition and talent. He saw with his own eyes that the child could still be free and unfettered after hurting the Mengs. If it were someone else, would they be able to do that? She had already built a foundation by developing steadily. Her future development would be smoother. Once she was fully fledged, all she needed was a fortuitous encounter, and she would be able to rise to the top in an instant, shocking the people of the world and shaking the entire court. Father, don't worry. I'm not a brainless brute. Jiang Pengji answered with a smile. Lu Shi nodded his head in satisfaction, but then realized that there was something wrong with his words. She was his daughter. While Jiang Pengji was preparing to exterminate the bandits and catch the murderer, who killed the Langjun of the Mengs, the head of the entourage of the Mengs was escorting Meng Liang's coffin back to Meng County in Song Prefecture. She wore a white silk mourning dress, a white banner hung high, paper money fluttered in the wind, and the soul-guiding bell rang all the way. Meng Liang had been dead for quite some time. In order to prevent maggots from rotting and to preserve his body in perfect condition, they had specially made a special coffin and placed a large amount of ice inside. They were rushing to send Meng Liang's body back to his homeland before the beginning of summer. However, it was difficult to speed up while carrying a coffin. It should have taken them only half a month to travel at top speed, but it took them a month and a half. They had lost count of how many times they had waited for a month and a half. By then, Jiang Pengji had expanded the number of troops to 1,000 after exterminating the bandits. That was the result of her being picky. If she had slightly loosened the selection criteria, she would have had about 2,000 troops. In a month and a half, they had conquered more than 20 bandits' villages and secretly used them as strongholds. They had looted countless spoils of war. She had handed over all her antiques, calligraphy, and paintings. She had kept all her food, cotton, and money. The Hejin County chief was well aware of her actions, but he did not say anything. In that era, knowledge was priceless. The value of calligraphy, paintings, and antiques far exceeded the value of food. However, that rule did not apply to Jiang Pengji. She knew that only by strengthening herself would she be able to survive in this chaotic world. Antiques, calligraphy, and paintings would all be hers in the future. Therefore, she handed over those things that looked expensive but were just old rolls of paper in her eyes without hesitation. She did not care, but the Hejin County chief felt that she was too honest and upright. She had suffered a great loss without saying a word. She had benefited from it. He was especially merciful to the captured bandits. It was up to the Lus to decide how to deal with them. The only regret was that they had not caught the bandit who killed Meng Liang, Meng Hun. But the Hejin County chief felt comfortable when he thought that the hidden dangers around Hejin County were decreasing day by day. He was also secretly envious of Lu Shi. Looking at the elite troops of Lu Shi and his own troops, the gap was too big. The former was serious about exterminating bandits. Blood flowed like a river at every turn. The latter was chased by bandits and could only let them grow. As the size of the troops increased, Meng Hun temporarily hid behind the scenes. Su Ku had to shoulder the double workload. Su Ku was so busy every day that he had no time to rest. If Qiguan Rang did not occasionally come to help him, he would have been exhausted. When he finally had some free time, he turned around and found that his Lungjuan's troop had already expanded to 1,000 people. 1,000 private troops was nothing in front of any noble family. But considering the time it took for the troops to be established and the current situation, it could only be described as incredible. Even though Su Ku had seen the development of the troops with his own eyes, he was still a little stunned. Rang, Xiao Yu has been busier lately. Qiguan Rang and Wei Yuan's daughter's wedding date was set in 8 months. Although it was a long time, they still had to go through a complicated ceremony. 8 months was considered a rush. If Wei Yuan was not in a hurry to get his daughter married, it could have been delayed for more than a year. Qiguan Rang was now the future groom. He was in high spirits and the haze between his eyebrows was swept away. It's not as leisurely as Wenjing, Su Ke said lightly. He and Qiguan Rang had been interacting more and more, and they had many common topics. Eventually, they became friends. You and Master Gongqiao have already decided to choose Lang Jun. Why haven't you expressed your opinion yet? Jiang Pengji's secret forces were developing rapidly, but there was no hidden danger of an unstable foundation. Instead, it was very solid. This was inseparable from Su Ke's hard work. However, one person's ability was limited. He only had so much energy. When there were only 100 people in the troops, he was in charge of the internal affairs and Meng Hun was in charge of the external affairs. They could manage the troops in an orderly manner. Now, Meng Hun could not show his face in public because of the sensitive timing. A lot of work was piled on him. Plus, the troops had expanded 10 times, so naturally, his work had increased by more than 10 times. There was no salary increase, and he had no colleagues to share his work with. Chapter 235. Su Ke was a smart man. He could tell that Qiguan Rang liked his Lang Jun. If that was the case, why didn't he join them? If he joined them now, he could immediately push all the internal affairs to Qiguan Rang. He would be completely free. Su Ke worked overtime every day, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He was a young man who looked tired all day. Those who didn't know him would think that he was having sex every night. It's not the right time. Qiguan Rang forced a smile, but he wasn't good at that kind of expression. The curve of his mouth was stiff. Time? Su Ke asked, isn't this the right time? How could adding flowers to a brocade be compared to providing timely help? How could the insignificant friendship with Lang Jun be compared to when she had a firm foothold in the future? Qiguan Rang glanced at Su Ke and said, Dongqing still exists, and the royal family still has some power. It's not the right time yet. Su Ke was silent for a while. He vaguely understood what Qiguan Rang was implying. As long as Dongqing still existed, Jiang Pengji couldn't develop her business freely. The shop was small, and Su Ke could manage it all by himself. There was no point for Qiguan Rang to join them now. Other than sharing Su Ke's workload and helping him get off work on time every day. He would wait for the time when Jiang Pengji really needed him. If it was someone else, he would have been furious if he showed the intention to assist Jiang Pengji but refused to join them. What made Qiguan Rang gratified was that Jiang Pengji could completely understand and support his modesty. It was a tacit understanding between him and Jiang Pengji. They were both teachers and friends, and they got along well. Because of that, Qiguan Rang would occasionally come over to help Su Ke with some of his work. Su Ke's face turned pale. He said gloomily, I can only hope that the time comes soon, otherwise, according to his Lang Jun's development, he would definitely die of exhaustion. His Lang Jun was too good at delegating work. Laymen don't care about professionals. Qiguan Rang stopped him from saying anything. Qiguan Rang looked at Su Ke and teased, Xiaoyu, you're at the age to get married. Why don't you take some time to think about it? No matter how unreasonable Lu Langjun is, he can't possibly ignore his subordinate's marriage, right? Seeing that the young man was dating, getting married, and having a baby, she should at least give him a few days off. Qiguan Rang did not want to join the team at this time because he saw the heavy workload and wanted to relax for a few more days. After hearing this, Su Ke's face turned red and pale. He seemed to be in a dilemma. When Zheng's suggestion is really, could he say that Qiguan Rang was very similar to his Langjun in some aspects? If Jiang Pengji knew how busy Su Ke was, she would probably say the same thing. Suddenly, Su Ke changed his mind. He hoped that the time for Qiguan Rang to join them would come later. He could not imagine what would happen if his Langjun and Qiguan Rang got together. He would be the one who would be exhausted. Qiguan Rang pursed his lips and said, Xiaoyu, you don't have to be so depressed. Once Lu Longjuan's name spreads, there will naturally be talents coming to visit. Su Ke still had a hopeless expression on his face. Wait until then? He guessed that he had already died of exhaustion at his post. Although Jiang Pengji was a hands-off boss, it did not mean that she did not care about anything. Sans Hisongshu Ningshi, the streamer has been going shopping for the past 2 days. I feel a little bored, Luxio was Hao Yaoqiao, #propping chin. The streamer is not a 10,000-year-old primary school student. There will be incidents wherever she goes. Recently, the streamer has been watching all kinds of bandit suppression series. It was exciting at first, but it got boring after a while. Now, shopping and drinking are like watching a gourmet show. A month and a half had passed, and the streaming room's upper limit was still 10,000 people. Jiang Pengji streamed every day. With the flow of people in the streaming room and all kinds of gifts, she had accumulated 986,000 points of popularity. In a few days, she would break through the million mark. The system looked at the popularity points enviously. It tried to persuade Jiang Pengji to use them to increase the level of the streaming room, but she had heartlessly rejected it. In the end, the system was so angry that it could not do anything to her. Tudu Feichio, I think it's okay. Anyway, I think the streamer's streaming is good. Also, think about the pile of work on Su Ke's desk. If the streamer streamed how to deal with them, I think it would be even more boring. When the bullet screen was sent, the audience in the streaming room was silent for a second. Then, they all laughed, ha ha ha, because they felt sorry for Su Ke. Sherry de Dali, Su Ke is really unlucky to have a Zhou Bapi like the streamer. Ko Jiaoqi fan, if I had a boss like her, would strongly request 5 insurances, 1 housing fund, and most importantly, a raise in salary. Jiang Pengji sat at a noodle stall by the street, eating bland noodles. Her eyes were secretly looking at the screen, but her ears were listening to the conversation of the customers. She was multitasking. She added a bullet screen from the streamer. Streamer V, I just passed by the cloth shop. Didn't I ask Takshu to pick some new cloth for him and his aunt? Jiang Pengji thought about it carefully. It seemed that Su Ke's current living standard was not bad, and he did not have any other needs. She asked the servants to prepare some cloth, rice, and silver for him and sent them all to his aunt. Is that a raise in salary? Yinuagia Zhuga Qinma, that makes sense. Su Ke is speechless. But you forgot the most important thing, the vacation. It was good to give him a raise, but he did not have time to enjoy the money he earned. He was so tired all day. Su Ke still deserved to be distressed. Jiang Pengji coughed in her heart. Streamer V, as the saying goes, capable people do more work. Now we are short of manpower. Write down the vacation for him first and put it together later. She said it nicely, but not only Su Ke, but even the audience in the streaming room did not believe her. Their Longjuan's daily activities were either suppressing bandits or eating and drinking. As her subordinate, how could Su Ke not feel bad? Regarding this, Jiang Pengji expressed that she was wronged. Suppressing bandits and making trouble was true, but she did not admit to eating and drinking. Every day, she went out shopping with a proper purpose. After finishing the noodles, Jiang Pengji took out 3 copper coins to pay. The other customers also left. Back at the mansion, Jiang Pengji went to the study and took out the property account book that Su Ke had made. All kinds of items were carefully categorized and looked very clear. She put down the book and took the bamboo paper from the corner of the desk. There were all kinds of data listed on it. Tudu Feichio, I haven't been here for a few days. What are you reading? Chapter 236. 237, Vomiting Blood, 6, Let You See a Baby, Musician Zhuge Qinma, I don't even need to help you to the toilet. The streamer's handwriting is elegant and flamboyant, but to put it bluntly. What the hell is she writing? How can you understand it? You live up to your ID. Jiang Pengji's handwriting was just like her personality. She did whatever she wanted. In the past, she would follow Lu Shi's handwriting and write in an orderly manner. But ever since she used charcoal to write and draw on coarse cloth, she seemed to have opened a door to a whole new world. Her handwriting became wilder and wilder. She completely let go of herself, and her handwriting was even more sloppy than wild cursive. Musician Zhuge Qinma, you're flattering me. Tout de fait, if this is really the record for the grain price. Does it mean that the streamer's plan is about to begin? In the streaming room, even though the content was boring, the passion of the viewers did not diminish. As the streaming room gained fame, more and more people believed in it. The viewers found it harder to watch the stream. Every seat was hard to get. Even if you had been single for 30 years and had a 100 megabit internet speed, you might not be able to get one. What was worse was that the streaming room could not be broadcasted. If the viewers wanted to watch the stream, they would have to wait for the video to be broadcasted on Baidu the next day. Tout de fait could be considered a veteran in the streaming room. He kept up with the updates. He recorded everything that happened around the streamer during the stream and even compiled a booklet for it. As soon as he heard that the grain price had skyrocketed, he immediately thought of Jiang Pengji's plan to suppress the grain price. It was as if he had been injected with chicken blood. Jiang Pengji shook her head. It's not the right time. She had been walking the streets and alleys. She had visited the tea houses, eateries, and taverns. She had heard the people talking about the recent gossip. More and more of it was related to the civil unrest in Tsang Prefecture and Meng County. But their news had not been confirmed, so the spread was limited. Otherwise, why would the grain price have only doubled? Jiang Pengji murmured, it's too early to make a move. The rumors are still brewing. There's still some time before they really explode. When the time comes, the people will panic and rush to the grain stores to buy grain. The grain price will not be the same as it is today. Some of the people would believe the baseless rumors, but the doubling of the grain price would make them hesitate. If Jiang Pengji started her plan now, her family's grain store would be emptied by another force. When the food shortage started, most of the people would have to grit their teeth and buy the food that had skyrocketed in price. So, she was not in a hurry. When the government of Hejian County confirmed the news of the civil unrest in Sangzhou, the people would panic and find that they could no longer afford to buy food. That would be the time for Jiang Pengji to strike. She took a look at Su Ku's statistical report and found that they had achieved great results in suppressing the bandits in the past month. The money collected was exchanged for food, which was purchased from the nearby Zisong County at regular prices. It added up to about 1,500 dong. The 3,000 dong she had extorted from the Mengs and the 1,300 dong the Hejian County chief had collected from various aristocratic families. After deducting the food consumed during this period of time, she still had 5,500 dong left, which was much more than she had expected. Takshu, go and tell the butler to call the shopkeeper of the grain store over here. The second branch of the Lus owned all kinds of stores. Half of them were Gu Min's dowry, and the other half were bought by Lu Shi over the years. The Lus had 3 grain stores in Hejian. They were located in different areas and had different customers. Daily necessities such as rice, oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea did not make a lot of money, but every person needed them, and the demand was huge. Therefore, the profits of those stores were moderate every year. As long as the shopkeepers followed the rules, it would be difficult for them to make a loss. The 3 shopkeepers were a little scared when they were suddenly summoned by their master. They were afraid that they had done something wrong and would be fired. Don't be so nervous. I called you here to ask you some questions. Jiang Pengji sat at the head of the table and asked one of them in a cold voice, how's the business these days? The shopkeeper answered respectfully, the business is okay. The people are worried about the civil unrest in Sangzhou, so the grain is selling smoothly. Is there anything else? The shopkeeper was startled. He thought carefully and said, apart from some scattered purchases, there are many big businesses. The so-called big businesses were actually other grain stores planning to buy in bulk from them. But the shopkeepers were not stupid. They knew that the price of grain was rising fast, so they could wait for a while and sell slowly after the price rose to another level. Anyway, no matter where the grain was, they would not lose money. The only difference was whether they could make more or less. You sold the grain? Jiang Pengji asked. In order to have a continuous supply, the grain stores would more or less have some grain in storage. The shopkeeper hurriedly said, I wouldn't dare to do that. Of course, I have to ask my master before I make a decision. Jiang Pengji nodded with satisfaction and said, just follow the price of grain these days. If the people want to buy in bulk, you can sell it as usual. If someone wants to buy in bulk, you don't have to ask for permission. Just say yes. The three shopkeepers hesitated. In their opinion, it was a good opportunity to make money. They should limit the sale and wait for the grain price to rise before selling. It would definitely be more profitable than selling it now. Jiang Pengji did not intend to explain. She only said coldly, just do as I say. I will have other instructions when the time comes. All merchants were unscrupulous. Merchants were born with the instinct to pursue profits. No matter what era it was, this had never changed. But for Jiang Pengji, the main purpose of the plan was not to make money, but to gain fame. Or rather, she wanted to earn both money and fame. To others, it seemed impossible, but the opportunity was right in front of her. She had to seize it. The three shopkeepers looked at each other. But Jiang Pengji was their master. Lu Shi had never cared about the family affairs, Madame who had always allowed Jiang Pengji to do whatever she wanted, and the second lady had no reason to support her. The shopkeepers had no choice but to listen to her. Yes. The three of them replied in unison. You may leave now. Remember to report back if anything happens. When Hejin County was in turmoil due to the civil unrest in Song Prefecture, the Meng's entourage finally arrived at Meng County in Song Prefecture before the weather got hotter. Meng County was a wasteland. The streets were empty, and there was not a soul to be seen. The sun hung high in the sky, and everyone felt a chill. The white banners fluttered in the wind, making a rustling sound. It made the scene even more desolate. Even though the Meng County chief's mansion had been burned down by Meng Hun, Meng Zhan still had a luxurious mansion. Chapter 237. 238, Spitting Blood, 7, Who are you? The soldier saw the coffin on the carriage from far away. Seeing that they still wanted to get closer, he took out his knife and stopped them. This is the Meng's territory. You lowly people, leave now. Don't you dare dirty the eyes and ears of the nobles. The head of the entourage rolled down from the carriage in a sorry state. His face was covered with tears. His head and waist were wrapped in white cloth, and his body was draped in linen clothes. His face was unkempt, and his eyes were bloodshot. His eye bags were heavy, and his face was covered in a layer of dirty oil. He looked extremely unkempt. I have something urgent to report to the Lord. Second Langjun. Second Langjun is back. He cried as he spoke. He knelt on the ground and took out his token with trembling fingers. The words carved on it could prove his identity. The soldier didn't know how to read, but he recognized the token. His attitude suddenly changed. What? Second Langjun is back? The soldier's expression changed. He was about to flatter Meng Liang to leave a good impression when he saw the coffin on the carriage. All of a sudden, an ominous feeling spread from his back to the back of his head. He felt numb all over. Could it be? Could it be that the person in the coffin was Second Langjun, Meng Liang? This conjecture shocked the soldier. Hurry up and report to the Lord. Second Langjun's body is back. Hurry up. The head of the entourage didn't dare to face Meng Zhan's anger. He roared at the soldier. The soldier was also shocked by the series of events. In a daze, he staggered and ran towards the Meng residence. For a moment, he did not expect the fury of the informant. Meng Zhan was having tea and wine with his friend in the waterside pavilion. They sat opposite each other, talking about the world and laughing. But the atmosphere didn't last long. The servant made a lot of noise. His rude behavior made Meng Zhan very angry. The Mengs were one of the 4 noble families in Dongqing. They were very strict. Even the lowest servant had the best manners. No one could find fault with them. It was like when he was entertaining a guest. Even if his friend didn't care, Meng Zhan still felt embarrassed when something so embarrassing happened. Perhaps something happened. Why don't you ask, County Chief Meng? The friend smiled warmly, and his eyes were calm like the clouds in the sky, causing others to feel a sense of closeness and peace. Meng Zhan held back his anger. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and said, "I didn't teach my servant well. Please forgive me." After saying that, he turned his head and his face darkened. He got up and walked towards the rash servant. Meng Zhan looked impatient. "Tell me, what happened?" The servant shivered and tried to lower his body to the ground, trying to minimize his presence. Only then did Meng Zhan realize that there was an unfamiliar soldier beside the servant. Judging by his attire, he should be a guard of the Mengs. All of a sudden, Meng Zhan's anger grew. This was the place where he entertained his distinguished guests. A guard guarding the gate of the courtyard dared to break in. If this was seen by others, how could he not laugh at the Meng family for not being strict enough to control a mere servant? However, before he could get angry, the soldier had already finished speaking while trembling. "Master. Master. Second Langjuan's body has been brought back." Meng Zhan's mind went blank after he heard it. It was as if thunder exploded in his ears and took away his hearing. After a long time, Meng Zhan regained his senses and grabbed the soldier's collar. His rough movement also startled the guests in the waterside pavilion. "What did you say? Whose body has been brought back?" Meng Zhan's eyes were wide open. His crazy look was a sharp contrast to his usual gentle and elegant appearance. The soldier became more and more nervous, but he still answered subconsciously, "Second Langjuan's body has been brought back." Second Langjuan? Meng Zhan was so scared that he took a step back. His body hit the pillar of the waterside pavilion. It was as if all his strength had been sucked out. The group of servants were so scared that they knelt on the ground and didn't dare to raise their heads. His friend who was staying in the waterside pavilion heard the commotion and was confused. He was about to stand up, but he saw Meng Zhan holding his chest with his right hand and spitting out a mouthful of blood. His eyes rolled back and he fell into the pond. Witnessing all of this, the friend's expression was slightly startled, and he stopped in his tracks. What? What happened? Meng Zhan spat out blood and fell into the pond. Everyone was so shocked that they forgot to go into the water to save him. In the end, his friend came back to his senses and asked someone to jump into the water to save Meng Zhan, who was in a coma. Meng Zhan woke up from his coma in a daze. He saw the familiar scenery and his friend next to his bed. He was shocked at first, but then he remembered the news he heard before he passed out. He quickly lifted the quilt. "County Chief Meng, the doctor just came to check on you. You are in shock. You need to rest." Meng Zhan suddenly burst out a strong force. He raised his hand and pushed his friend away. His eyes were full of hatred. "Bring him here." Meng Zhan was so angry that he almost bit his tongue. "Who killed Meng Zhan?" "Meng Zhan?" His friend stood up awkwardly. He was shocked when he heard the name. Wasn't that the name of the second Langjun of the Mengs? What happened? Seeing Meng Zhan leave in anger, the friend's shocked expression returned to normal. He even tidied up his hair and clothes. He thought to himself, did something really happen to the second Langjun of the Mengs? Thinking about the young friend he met before he came to Meng County, the man raised his eyebrows and his eyes flashed with a hint of playfulness. "Don't tell me, you've already predicted this?" He followed Meng Zhan and followed him to the hall where Meng Liang's coffin was placed. The servants had put on plain linen clothes, and the decorations in the room had been changed as well. White banners were fluttering, and candles were burning. It looked like a mourning hall, with a giant coffin in the middle. As soon as he walked in, a strong rancid smell lingered in his nose. Meng Zhan lost his composure and pushed open the lid of the coffin. The body inside was already rotten and covered with maggots. Meng Liang had been dead for almost 3 months, and the weather was getting hotter and hotter. There was no place to replenish the ice along the way, so the body could not be preserved. It was normal for maggots to grow. However, the more it was like this, the greater the blow to Meng Zhan. Even though he didn't believe that the person in the coffin was his son, he could still see the outline of Meng Liang from the maggot-covered face. This was his son. Seeing this, Meng Zhan's throat hurt again. Blood spilled out from the corner of his mouth. This scene caused everyone to be shocked again and again. The friend secretly raised his eyebrows. As he was about to leave, there was a fragrant wind. He saw a lady in luxurious clothes lying on the coffin, crying. She looked like a pear blossom in the rain. It was a pitiful sight. However, with such thick makeup on her face, it was impressive that she didn't make a mess of her face when she cried. The friend thought to himself. He then heard the lady call the second Lang Jun in the coffin as her son. Wait, wasn't Meng Liang's mother the second wife of the county chief of Hu County, Lu Shi? The friend's eyes widened. Chapter 238. 239, Spitting Blood, 8. His friends stopped looking at him and comforted him gently. County Chief Meng, I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be too sad. However, the pain of losing a son in his middle age was not something that could be soothed by a few words of comfort. Meng Zhan held the edge of the coffin with both of his hands. His fingers were visibly shaking. Because he was using too much strength, the tips of his fingers had turned white. Seeing his veins bulging and his face dark, his friend didn't say anything else. He just sighed and stepped aside. Obviously, Meng Zhan didn't need someone else to comfort him. He needed a quiet place where he could calm down and recover from the sudden shock. However, Meng Zhan didn't want to be alone. He just wanted to figure out why Meng Liang died. His son was fine. Even though he had some small problems and made some mistakes, so what? The Mengs had been a prominent family since the founding of the previous dynasty. They had a huge business and they could handle anything for Meng Liang. If he had known this would happen when he sent him to Shangjing, he would have shouldered all the pressure and protected him under his wings. Now, he was on the road to hell at such a young age. As an old father, he had to watch his son die before him. Meng Zhan was a man after all. He was stronger than his crying concubine. After spitting blood a few times, he managed to regain some of his sanity. Bring him here. I want to ask, just who is so daring that he actually dared to be so ruthless towards little Ro? Meng Zhan's eyes turned red and blue veins popped up on his forehead. He didn't look like the gentle and gentleman he used to be. He looked like he had aged 20 years. His friends didn't know whether to leave or stay. They could only put on a serious face and lower their own sense of existence. Not long after, the head of the entourage knelt down in front of Meng Liang's coffin. His stubbled face was covered with tears. The one who killed second Lang Jun was the thief, Meng Hun. He lied to the master. The head of the entourage was anxious. Fear was lingering in his brain. He thought Meng Zhan would stand up and cut his head off in the next second. Meng Zhan smiled coldly. He looked vicious and ferocious. Tell me everything. Meng Hun, he. His friend frowned. It was the first time he had seen Meng Zhan's expression other than a warm smile. Meng Zhan's whole body was filled with hostility, which made people uncomfortable. But considering that Meng Zhan had just lost his beloved son, it was not too much. The head of the entourage secretly clenched his fists. Whether he could keep his life or not depended on this. After gathering his emotions, the head of the entourage told the story that he had been preparing for over a month. He tried to focus on Meng Hun's treachery and exaggerate the scene when he found the body. He portrayed himself as a loyal man, but the enemy was too cunning. He had no choice but to take back Meng Liang's body. "Master, you must help Second Lang Jun." The head of the entourage was crying on the ground. Tears and mucus were running down his face. Normally, Meng Zhan would have kicked him in the chest. But this time, it was a good chance for him to save his life. "When I got Second Lang Jun's body back, I found out that Second Lang Jun. He was bled to death." The head of the entourage was lying on the ground. Meng Zhan felt another sharp pain in his chest. His right hand clutched the clothes on the left side of his chest. He clenched his teeth and his lips turned blue. Seeing that he was about to pass out again, Meng Zhan pulled himself together with his extraordinary willpower. His eyes were extremely cold. "You said Second Lang Jun was bled to death by Meng Hun?" These words were squeezed out through gritted teeth. No wonder Shang Er's body was purple. Even though part of it was rotten, the body was still weirder than a normal person's. "Yes." The head of the entourage nodded with difficulty. Tears streamed down his face. "I failed to protect Second Lang Jun. Master, please allow me to avenge him. When I get my revenge, I will kill myself. I will protect Second Lang Jun in the afterlife." Meng Zhan's chest was rising and falling rapidly. His beloved concubine had already held him and helped him breathe. After a long time, so long that the head of the entourage thought he was going to die, Meng Zhan's cold and arrogant voice came into his ears. "Forget it. If Shang knew you were so loyal, he would be happy." Meng Zhan said it unwillingly. He glanced at his friend and said stiffly, "I must avenge Shang Er. I am the son of the Mengs. The name of the Mengs in Sangzhou is not something a traitor can humiliate. If I don't kill him, I am not a man." At that moment, the head of the entourage seemed to remember something. He thought Meng Zhan's hatred could burn even more. After all, he was Meng Zhan's subordinate. The head of the entourage knew Meng Zhan's character very well. The reason why he could stay calm and spare Meng Zhan's death sentence was because he was worried that there were other people around. He couldn't reveal his true nature. If his friend left after paying his condolences, Meng Zhan would be doomed. So, the head of the entourage played a trick. With a sorrowful expression, he took out a coarse blue cloth from his bosom and untied it. Meng Zhan took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. He asked, "What is this?" The head of the entourage answered, "This is the evidence that the traitor humiliated the Mengs and fooled us." Meng Zhan grabbed it and read every roll of coarse cloth carefully. The more he read, the more his hands trembled. In the end, he unfolded the largest piece of coarse cloth. The calligraphy on it was written in blood. It had already solidified and darkened. It emitted a pungent smell. Meng Zhan's beloved concubine wanted to go closer to read it, but she was choked by the smell. Those who break their promises are the dogs of the Mengs. Meng Zhan's face turned green as he read the beginning. It was as if someone had slapped him 100 times. "The Mengs want to use me as a scapegoat to humiliate my wife and daughter. They will be humiliated even after they die." Meng Zhan's heart sank. He couldn't believe that Meng Hun, who was only a martial artist, could see through his real intention. His hands were still shaking as he unfolded the coarse cloth. He hurried to continue reading. "If you want to do this to me, don't blame me for being ruthless. If Meng Zhan doesn't die, how can I face the consequences?" Meng Zhan's heart ached. The blue veins on his forehead bulged. His head hurt so much that the world seemed to be shaking. Puff! He spat out another mouthful of blood. Meng Zhan's face was pale and he fell to the ground. The coarse cloth fell to the ground. In just one day, he had spat out blood several times. His life was short because of the damage to his foundation. Chapter 239. 240. The Grain Store Dispute. 1. I thank you on behalf of my husband. Meng Zhan's friend quietly stepped away to avoid Meng Zhan's concubine's bow. Not to mention anything else, but based on the gossip he heard, he felt that the Mengs did not live up to its reputation. He had never heard of the Mengs using a concubine to pretend to be the legitimate son. He didn't want to get involved in this mess. Chief Meng needs to rest after this incident. You can't get angry again in case it hurts your foundation. Before the medical officer could step out of the main street where the Meng residence was located, he was hurriedly called back. He wrote a new prescription and gave a few instructions. His friend took the chance to leave. He was worried that he would hear another scandal if he stayed any longer. Meng Liang died. Everyone in the Meng's family mourned. They wore plain linen clothes. The Meng's army was also ordered to mourn for the second Langjun. Meng Zhan's action was met with a lot of resistance. He was scolded by several elders. Who was Meng Liang? A son of the first wife who was not even 20 years old. To the public, he was the son of the first wife. However, some of the elders who had heard the rumors knew that Meng Liang's identity was different. His identity as the son of the first wife was still a question mark. It was not like the Meng family was so short of people that Meng Liang was the only one. There were still many candidates for the Meng family. A son of the first wife died and the entire Meng's army mourned for him. Who did he think he was? Even if the emperor of Dongqing passed away, he wouldn't be treated like this. More importantly, it was a critical moment. The civil unrest in Song Prefecture was getting worse. Mobs were everywhere. The Meng's army needed to clean up their colleagues. They didn't have time to mourn for a young boy. Speaking of which, Meng Liang was the source of the civil unrest. If it weren't for the fact that the boy was too much of a bastard and made the people angry, the Mengs wouldn't be in such an awkward situation. It was better for him to die. He didn't have a good background anyway. If it weren't for the fact that Meng Zhan loved him so much that he wouldn't give him anything and even ignored the legitimate eldest son of the first wife, the elders wouldn't have cared about Meng Liang. He was just a piece of mud that couldn't be helped. He was a waste of air when alive and a waste of land when dead. Meng Zhan's heart was as hard as steel. He refused to give in even half a step. The two sides were locked in a stalemate. As a result, there were several voices within the Meng family's army. The news of the civil unrest that they had painstakingly concealed seemed to have grown wings and spread among the people. When the people in the neighboring counties and prefectures heard the news, they panicked and felt insecure. The Meng family is truly a sinner. A plain-looking carriage stopped on the mountain road. The man in the carriage lifted the curtain and saw the people fighting outside. Their clothes were ragged and their faces were yellow from hunger. It was a scene of chaos. The man sighed in his heart and put down the hand that lifted the curtain. Judging from his appearance, he wasn't the man who was a guest at the Meng residence. At this moment, the guard outside asked him in a low voice. "Master, should we return to Shangjing first, or?" The guard's voice was filled with concern and nervousness. There were only 11 of them, including the man. With such a small group of people, if they encountered a large wave of rioters, they could not guarantee the safety of the man in the carriage. The longer they stayed, the more dangerous it would be. The man went silent for a moment before he said abruptly, "No, let's go to Langia." He had some doubts and was eager to seek confirmation from his young friend. The guard did not even think about it. He answered yes and pulled the reins of the carriage. Soon, the seemingly ordinary carriage completely disappeared on the vast mountain road. "Yuanjing, what kind of students do you have?" Faintly, the man seemed to be complaining. There were different voices within the Meng family's army. The suppression was lax, which made the already serious civil unrest even more intense. Hejin County, which was only half a month away from Meng County, was naturally the first to be affected. Jiang Pengji returned to the mansion from the streets as usual. The information she collected made her look cold. The audience in the streaming room could feel the low pressure around her through the screen. Even the funny comments on the bullet screen had decreased greatly. The price of grain has soared to 8 times the original price. Even so, the supply still cannot meet the demand. Su-ku hurriedly jumped off the carriage and hurried to Jiang Pengji's study room. He knelt in front of her and said, "Lang Jun, it's time for us to take action." When the price of grain skyrocketed, it would be difficult for them to lower the price. By then, they would have to face the resistance of all the grain merchants in Hejin County. The grain merchants were supported by the gentry clans. They were not afraid of 1 or 2 of them, but it would be hard to say if they joined forces. No hurry. Jiang Pengji was expressionless. She seemed to be deep in thought, which made Su-ku so anxious that he almost couldn't speak. It was not the time to act aloof. "Let me ask you, have you found any refugees from the nearby counties?" Jiang Pengji asked. "Not near Hejin County, but there are many in Zisong County." Zisong County was near Hejin County, which was closer to Meng County in Song Prefecture. If there were refugees, they would be the first to appear. "I got it." Jiang Pengji pounded her palms and said, "Tell the grain stores to put out the signboards and try to spread it throughout Hejin County. We must let every citizen know that the 3 grain stores will be buying large quantities of cheap grain." Signboards? Su-ku was startled. "What is that?" "It means to widely advertise. Hire 30 to 50 children or hooligans who are familiar with the roads nearby. Give them some money and let them advertise on the streets." Jiang Pengji explained. "Anyway, we must let the people know as soon as possible." Su-ku's eyes flashed. If it were not for the situation, he would have praised his Lungjuan's idea. Nowadays, there were too few people who could read. Even if they put up the signboards at the city gates, not many people would know about the grain stores. The effect was minimal. If they let children or hooligans advertise everywhere, it would be faster and wider than just putting up the signboards. The key was that the labor cost was not high. "I'll do it now." Su-ku calmed himself down, bowed to Jiang Pengji, and left. "Wait!" Jiang Pengji suddenly shouted and stopped Su-ku, who was in a hurry to leave. "Before we do this, go and find out which grain store has the lowest price. The price we set will always be 20% lower than the lowest price." Su-ku was dumbfounded. "Not the normal price?" Jiang Pengji snorted and said, "We just need to be kinder than the black-hearted merchants. We are good people, understand?" Su-ku was still dumbfounded. It was different from what he had imagined. "Don't worry. The price will not go on." Jiang Pengji said calmly, "Our price will only be 20% lower than the other grain stores. If they want to compete, they will naturally lower their price. Then we will lower it by 20%. Chapter 240. When Jiang Pengji started to take measures, the price of grain had already soared to more than 9 times the price in peacetime. The aristocratic families had their own granaries, so they didn't have to worry about food and drink. Instead, they could take advantage of this opportunity to sell off the old grain stored in the granary at a high price. On the contrary, the common people had little savings, and their families were about to starve to death. However, the price of grain was rising fiercely. Many people were worried about it. Many women were pacing back and forth in front of the grain stores, waiting for the grain to be cheaper. They didn't expect the price to go up every time. "If we don't buy more, we won't even be able to afford a bucket of rice with our savings." "You can still afford to buy rice?" "My husband broke his leg a while ago, and we've spent all our money to buy medicine for him. Today, we even slaughtered the only hen that could lay eggs to make soup for him. I really don't know how we're going to live like this. I don't know what happened. Why is the grain so expensive? If this goes on, the kids at home will have to go hungry." Even if they were hardworking and capable, they had no money and no grain at home. Their families would have to go hungry. The grain store was not a charity. How could the price be lowered just because they were poor? The world is getting more and more difficult every day. A woman sighed and said, "A while ago, I was helping to wash the dishes in the tea house at the entrance of the city to earn some pocket money. I heard some soldiers talking about it. It seems that there is a big mess in some county in Sangzhou. It is close to Hejian County. The proximity meant that the flames of war could reach here, and it also meant that countless refugees who had left their homes would flee here. Which family wouldn't tremble in fear when they heard about the war? If their strong young men were conscripted into the army, they might not be able to come back. As for the refugees, if people were in that state, what wouldn't they do besides burning, killing, and looting? Maybe it would be even crueler than robbing people. Many women trembled just thinking about it. At least they had some savings at home, so they could buy grain from the grain store. The other poorer families could only dig weeds in the mountains and peel bark from trees. The food they ate was not even as good as the old sows in their pigsty. Should we go to other grain stores? Maybe there are cheaper ones. A woman in a dark linen robe hesitantly held a basket and looked at the grain store not far away. There were many grain stores in the city. After comparing 3 stores, there was bound to be one that was cheaper. If I had known that this would happen, I would have gone to buy them a long time ago. I thought that it was expensive back then, but who could have known that the price of grain would only get higher by the day? That's right. In the past, my husband thought that I was short-sighted and that the weather was good this year, so the food would be cheaper than before. He thought that I would wait a few more days. But now, it's so much more expensive. I don't know how I'm going to survive. The women walked together, holding each other's hand, chatting with each other. At this moment, a child wearing patched clothes ran over from the corner of the street, laughing and shouting loudly. A woman raised her hand to stop the child and asked carefully, "Hey, what did you just say?" It seemed that this was not the first time the child had been stopped. He answered in a loud voice very naturally. "The grain shop in the Dog-Tail Alley on Vermilion Bird Street is the cheapest. It's 20% cheaper than the other shops." "How much is 20% cheaper?" The child shook his head. "I don't know. The owner of the grain shop said that it's 20% cheaper." After all, he was just a child. Su Ke knew that children could not remember the price of grain, so he simply asked them to remember the shortest advertisement. The women looked at each other in confusion. Should we go and take a look? They could save as much as they could, even if they had to go around half of the city. Let's go and take a look. It's not far from here. After a few words, the women had decided where to go. To attract more customers, Jiang Pengji had divided the area where the 3 grain shops were located into 3 parts. With the grain store's location as the center, the mobile advertisements in this area would focus on the grain store. When the women arrived, there was already a long queue in front of the grain shop. Listening to the people's discussion, the price of grain was still high, but it was indeed much cheaper than the other grain shops they had seen before. Well, there are no good things if they are cheap. Could it be that the grain they are selling has bugs, or something else? With their sharp ears, they could hear the discussion from the crowd. Immediately, someone jumped out and said, "Someone bought 2 buckets of grain. I have seen it. It's white and good." There was more than one person who was worried about the quality of the grain in the grain shop. Hearing that, he became even more worried. That's strange. Others are raising the price, but they are lowering the price. Isn't it said that merchants are black-hearted? A man who was queuing up to buy food couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "What do you know? Don't you know who the owner of the grain shop is? It's the famous Hu County chief. I heard that Hu County has so much grain that it can rot on the ground. So what if it's cheap? Don't buy it if you don't like it. Hey, why are you so blunt? How would I know that the owner of the grain shop is Lu Shi?" Ordinary people might not have heard of Lu Shi, but when Hu County chief was mentioned, their first impression was that he was rich, had grain, and had a good heart. With the promotion of the advertisements, the queue in front of the grain shop became longer and longer. Many people who came late were worried that they would not be able to buy grain. At that moment, the manager of the grain shop stood out and bowed to the crowd, saying that the store had enough grain. Outside the crowd, Jiang Pengji and Su Ku were sitting in the carriage. Su Ku looked at the crowd and felt worried. There were so many people buying grain. He was worried that the store would not have enough grain. The effect of the advertisements was beyond his expectation. The queue was still growing. Jiang Pengji could see his worry at first glance. She said calmly, "For the people, the price of grain is still too high. Most of them are just watching and won't buy in large quantities. So, our store of grain will definitely last. By the way, have you prepared the people I asked you to prepare?" Su Ku cupped his hands and said, "Lang Jun, I have arranged everything." "Good. When there are more and more people watching, you can ask them to leave." Jiang Pengji's purpose was to suppress the grain price, not to sell the few thousand don of grain at the high price. Not only did she ask Su Ku to hire children and hooligans to act as mobile advertisements for the grain stores, but she also asked him to prepare a few people. These people were not to fool the people who bought the grain, but to sway the shopkeepers of other grain stores. Jiang Pengji started the price war. On the first day, she created the illusion that there was no limit to the grain store. Naturally, the other grain shops would be nervous. Chapter 241. To improve competitiveness, one had to start with the products themselves, the service attitude, or the price. Nowadays, people just wanted to survive. High-quality services were meaningless. What mattered most was to feed themselves with the least amount of money. Therefore, if other grain stores wanted to compete with Jiang Pengji, they had to lower their prices. Once they lowered their prices, Jiang Pengji would achieve her goal. The price war was always a trap. The party who had the upper hand would fight harder and harder. Those who tried to imitate her could only be led by the nose. Not to mention, her main goal was not to make money. If they tried to compete with her, they would definitely be cheated. The few pawns he had prepared were actually just pawns to confuse the grain shops. "Yes," Su Ku answered. Jiang Pengji put down the curtain and looked serious. She suddenly asked him, "Who do you think is responsible for this mess?" Su Ku, "The blame? Whose fault?" Jiang Pengji asked again. It seemed that Su Ku did not understand the meaning of the word blame. Su Ku thought about it seriously and looked serious. After all, it was a test given by his Lang Jun. If he performed poorly, it would affect his position in her heart. The time they spent together was enough for Su Ku to understand one thing: Lang Jun did not look at other people's conditions, only at their abilities. If he was incompetent in her heart, he would not be put in an important position in the future. However, Lang Jun's question was too broad. Su Ku could not answer it. "Is this question hard to answer?" Jiang Pengji asked. Su Ku quickly said, "I am incompetent, but I have some opinions about this question. On the surface, it should be the Mengzin Sangzhou that caused the people in Hejian to worry about their livelihood. But after thinking about it carefully, I think it should be more than that." Jiang Pengji did not agree or disagree. She continued to ask, "Anything else?" Su Ku gathered his courage and answered, "Maybe, it's the problem of the aristocratic families." Jiang Pengji's gaze drifted to Su Ku's face. The audience in the streaming room could clearly see Su Ku's stiff expression. "Zwizhen Beishijing, haha, don't be like this. You are scaring the young Su Ku. Steak, shredded pork, fine noodles, but Su Ku is really digging his own grave. The streamer's current identity is that of an aristocratic family. To say that all of this is the fault of an aristocratic family in front of an aristocratic family is simply asking for a beating. Lo Ciji Lianmeng, #propping chin. That's not right. The streamer doesn't like aristocratic families, okay? This answer is too broad. It's a universal answer, but what I want to know is more detailed inside information." Jiang Pengji wasn't angry because of Su Ku's offense. She was just not satisfied with his answer. Su Ku stood rooted to the ground in a daze. This question is indeed a bit difficult for you. Why don't you think about why the food supply is increasing so rapidly? Why couldn't the government take measures to protect the interests of the people? It had increased by 9 times. The few grain shops seemed to have discussed this beforehand. They raised the prices as they pleased, filling their money bags, but forcing countless people to starve. Su-ku said embarrassedly, most of the grain shops are under the name of the aristocratic families. They have a lot of food, and the government doesn't have such laws. More importantly, most of the officials were from those aristocratic families. Would they deliberately make life difficult for their families? Jiang Pengji didn't look happy. Even though she had achieved some results in suppressing the food price, she still wasn't in a good mood. If she wasn't in a good mood, the others wouldn't either. With that in mind, she was determined to occupy the grain market in Hejin County for the next 2 months. If you were the chief of Hejin County and you wanted to save the people, what would you do? Jiang Pengji threw another question to him. Su-ku complained in his heart. Who didn't know that the chief of Hejin County was just a mascot? He didn't have any power or influence. He only had a title, which couldn't suppress the rampant aristocratic families. Even if he had a bodhisattva's heart, he could only be indifferent when he was in that position. However, Su-ku wasn't an ordinary person. After thinking hard, he came up with a very bold idea. His Lang Jun always did not play by the rules. His thinking was even more unconstrained and unrestrained. Since that was the case, why didn't he change his way of thinking? Maybe he could get a different answer. Su-ku had a flash of inspiration. He had an idea. If I am the chief of Hejin County, I have no power or influence. I only have the title of the chief. I can't stop the soaring food price. If that's the case, why don't I encourage the grain merchants to continue to raise the price? The higher the better. Jiang Pengji's eyes lit up. She had a faint smile on her lips. The audience in the live streaming room was confused. Didn't you say you wanted to suppress the food price? Why did the host agree with Su-ku's answer? Lo Siji Lianmeng, I think I understand Su-ku's idea. To encourage the price of food to skyrocket, he secretly sent people to the neighboring counties to promote the food and encouraged the grain merchants there to transport the food to Hejin County to sell. When the supply increased and the demand remained the same, the price would naturally decrease. Merchants pursued profits. That was a common saying no matter what era it was. But this method can only be used once. Jiang Pengji nodded. She was very satisfied with Su-ku's answer. After all, he was a talent that she thought highly of. Jiang Pengji hoped that Su-ku could be more useful. After all, she was in dire need of manpower. Before she could find suitable people, she could only make Su-ku more useful. At the same time, Su-ku felt a chill down his spine. He had a vague premonition. There were many customers wandering in front of the other grain stores. Even if they were not going to buy, they were all potential customers. In less than half a day, all those people suddenly disappeared. It made the manager of the grain store, who was ready to make a big profit, very confused. He sent a worker to find out what was going on. Soon, he got a reply. Who is so bold? The manager of the grain store was furious. It was like stealing food from a tiger's mouth. The worker nervously told him the owner of the grain store, and then he became silent. It seemed to be a competition between grain stores, but if it was too embarrassing, the power behind each store would be involved. The worker hesitantly asked, "Manager, what should we do?" "Tut, what else can we do? Let's leave it at that. I will go to the manor and ask the head butler." At the same time, many managers of the grain stores in Hejin County made the same decision. Grain stores could not make a lot of money, but it was difficult for them to lose money. The aristocratic families did not take it seriously at first and let the managers make the decisions. The managers thought about it and decided that it was okay to make less money. Since it was a profit anyway, they might as well lower the price to the same. Chapter 242. What is the Luz trying to do? The shopkeeper of the grain store slammed the cupboard loudly. His old face was flushed with anger, and blue veins were popping on his forehead. He was suppressing his terrible anger. Who in this world would complain about not earning enough money? There was such a good opportunity in front of him, but the Luz jumped out to mess it up. The clerk looked at the deserted store and felt embarrassed. He whispered, "Shopkeeper, should we lower the price too?" If they didn't lower the price, they wouldn't be able to sell their stock. Earning less was better than not earning at all. The shopkeeper of the grain store was so angry that his beard was flying. He had completely lost his rationality. However, he did not want to be led by the nose when it came to lowering the price. "We can't lower the price." The shopkeeper clenched his teeth and said, according to the Luz behavior, they must have a lot of grain in their warehouse. They can afford to squander like this. If we lower the price and they continue to lower it, what should we do? Even though the head of the family had given him the power to manage the grain store, if he couldn't make a satisfactory profit every quarter, he would be the one to suffer when the higher-ups questioned him. Let's wait for a while and find someone to investigate the situation of the Luz mansion. The shopkeeper paced back and forth in the store with his hands behind his back. It seemed like he was going to break the tiles under his feet. The clerk asked, "Should we send someone to investigate their warehouse?" The shopkeeper was so angry that he almost laughed. He grinned and said, "Investigate the warehouse of the Luz? You?" The clerk shook his head like a rattle drum. What a joke. The granary was a money box for the aristocratic families. It was related to their daily meals. An outsider was not only allowed to investigate the granary, but if he was caught, it would be tantamount to poisoning someone's kitchen. It would be fine if he wasn't caught, but if he was, he would completely offend the Luz. The clerk scratched his head and asked the shopkeeper seriously, "Shopkeeper, I know you are the smartest. Do you have any ideas?" Looking at the clerk's flattering smile, the shopkeeper raised his hand and stroked his goatee. His eyes flashed with pride. "Come closer." The two of them whispered in each other's ears. The shop assistant's expression changed from confusion to sudden realization. He admired the shopkeeper's sophistication even more. "Great idea." The clerk patted the shopkeeper's horse. "Shopkeeper, you are so smart." "What is this?" The shopkeeper felt much better and was no longer as angry as before. "When it comes to managing the county and the people, I naturally can't compare to County Chief Luz. But in terms of business, I'm afraid County Chief Luz is just a layman and doesn't know the ropes." If that person really understood, how could he have made such a mistake and tried in vain to keep lowering the price, a crude scheme that harmed others without benefiting himself? In business, business was business. Although County Chief Luz was talented, he was just a boorish man when it came to business. Almost no one would have thought that it was not Lu's doing that the three grain stores of the Luz used the method of lowering prices to win over customers. They couldn't be blamed for the misunderstanding. Who asked the former Lu Shi and the current Jiang Pengji to dislike attending poetry gatherings? Don't think that these activities were boring. In fact, it was also an important way to promote oneself. It was the best place to show off one's talent and fame. If he didn't package himself and promote himself, how would others remember him? The former Lu Shi wouldn't have done that, but the current Jiang Pengji disdained to do so. Therefore, in the second branch of the Luz, outsiders always thought that Lu Shi was the head of the family. Naturally, he was the first person they thought of when something happened. Unintentionally, Lu Shi had become Jiang Pengji's scapegoat. In the eyes of outsiders, how could offending Lu Shi and offending Lu Shi's son be the same? Everyone bullied the weak and feared the strong. If it was the former, 99% of people would be afraid. After all, Lu Shi was not someone to be trifled with. If it was the latter, people would probably come to pressure him with all kinds of excuses. Even if they didn't torture you to death, they would still annoy you to death. If they couldn't afford to offend their father, why would they be afraid of the bastard? Of course, if they really did that, they would probably understand a principle. The bastard was even more dangerous than the father. The latter would only make you suffer, while the former would directly kill you. The clerk flattered the shopkeeper. That's right. I think so too. When it comes to making money, no one can be more experienced than you. Let's wait and see. The shopkeeper said decisively. I'd like to see how much grain he has and how many days he can squander. Because they had more grain than they had expected, the purchase limit was not implemented the next day. Jiang Pengji coldly looked at the statistics on the table. It was the price records of 31 grain stores in Hejin County. After the first price cut, they seemed to have reached some kind of tacit understanding. Not only did they not follow suit, but they also chose to ignore the 3 grain stores of the Lus. They let their own grain store be deserted, with not a single customer coming in. They did not move at all. Jiang Pengji saw that and sneered. You're quite calm, but that's all. If they chose to lower their prices immediately, the loss would be small. If they continued to be so reserved, she would not be polite. Early the next morning, Jiang Pengji asked Su Ku to do something for her. This. Lang Jun, do you really want to do this? Su Ku's eyes widened. Wouldn't that be too wicked? Jiang Pengji held a roll of books in her hand. She knocked on the table and said angrily, You saw the grand occasion yesterday. Although the people were attracted to the grain stores, not many people actually bought the grain because of the high prices. It was not that there were not many people, but it was less than she had expected. She was not satisfied with the transaction amount. Su Ku did not dare to respond. With the prices of the grain stores yesterday, it would be strange if there were many people who actually bought the grain. Although the prices of the 3 grain stores of the Lus had been lowered twice, it was still higher than the people's consumption level. Another day of price reduction. The people would naturally have the mentality of, wait a little longer, maybe it will be even cheaper. I've read the information my father gave me about Hu County. There is a lot of rain this year, so it should be a bumper harvest year. The drought in the neighboring 2 prefectures is also better than in previous years. The pressure of the food shortage will be much smaller than in previous years, which means that the grain prices will be exceptionally low after the autumn harvest. Jiang Pengji said coldly, We'd better convert the 5,000 don of grain we have into money before the autumn harvest. After the autumn harvest, we can buy the grain at a low price. After that, the price of the grain will increase by several times. If we can't sell it, we will lose money. Although the grain was not a business, who would want to make a few hundred if they could make a profit of 10,000 don? Jiang Pengji lacked everything at the moment. She could only use the method of increasing income and reducing expenditure to the maximum. She wanted to turn the 5,000 don of grain into the biggest profit. Su Ku was silent. So this was the reason why his Lang Jun wanted to cheat the grain stores of the other noble families. Very good and very powerful. He was speechless. Chapter 243. Excluding the 3 grain stores of the Lus, there are still 28 grain stores in Hejin County. After lowering their prices yesterday, all of them are looking forward to buying grain. It seems that they are suspicious of our grain storage. If so, why don't we tempt them to buy grain? For 1 grain store, a few thousand don of grain was a lot, but for 28 grain stores, it was nothing. Jiang Pengji had carefully made a budget. She set aside a part of it for the limited purchase, and sold the rest to those suckers at a high price. Su Ku was speechless. Suddenly, he felt lonely, like a hero who had no place to show his skills. His Lang Jun was too capable, and he, who was her right-hand man, felt sad. But will they really do that? Su Ku did not know much about business, so he was a little nervous. In fact, Jiang Pengji did not know much either. After all, she was a genetic warrior, and fighting was the mainstream of her life. Most of the skills and knowledge she learned were related to practical fighting. But she lived in an era where information was extremely advanced, so she could always learn something. She was not an expert, but she could still imitate others. Not to mention the suppression of business in ancient times. Of course, she could handle it. Of course they will. Even if we don't spread the news that we don't have enough grain, they will secretly test us. Jiang Pengji was a layman when it came to business, but when it came to cheating people and maximizing profits, she was the master of it. Whether it was in ancient times or in her previous era, as a general, she was not a reckless or brainless person. On the contrary, most of those people were smart. They looked crude, but they had a lot of tricks up their sleeves. Jiang Pengji was chosen by her old boss, stood out from many candidates, and became the commander of an army. Of course, she was not ordinary. Ask the shopkeepers of the grain stores to pay attention and record the appearance of every person who buys grain and the grain they buy, Jiang Pengji said. If I'm not wrong, those grain stores will send people to secretly buy grain from our grain stores to test us. She continued, what you need to do is to let your people spread the rumor, and at the same time, have the shopkeepers and workers put on a show. Put on a show? What kind of show? Of course, they would secretly say that there was not enough grain in the granary, and let the shopkeepers ask their master what they should do next. As long as the people who came to buy grain accidentally overheard it and brought it back, Jiang Pengji's goal would be achieved. Su Ku sighed in his heart and said, okay, I'll go and do it now. All right, go ahead. Although Su Ku was young, he was thorough and steady in his work. Jiang Pengji had always been at ease when she handed things over to him. Jiang Pengji's prediction was accurate. After noon, there were indeed a few people who bought a large amount of grain. One of them even bought a whole stone. If it was any other time, any commoner with a little extra money would be able to afford one stone. But now that the price of grain had skyrocketed, a single stone was a huge deal. When the sun was about to set, the clerk of the Lu's grain store hurriedly ran into the store from the side door. He was so anxious that he didn't even have time to wipe his sweat. He looked at the shopkeeper in panic, as if he had something important to report but couldn't say it directly in front of the other commoners. Seeing that, the shopkeeper put down the customer he was serving and went to a corner to talk with the clerk. One could vaguely hear words like 1,900 don, and not enough. The inside of the grain store was very noisy. There were many people buying grain everywhere. It was hard to hear their conversation unless one was paying attention. However, among this batch of people who were buying grain, many of them were spies from other grain stores. Is what you said true? The spy answered, it's true. I heard them say that they have less than 1,900 don of grain. If they continue to sell like this, it won't last more than a few days. After hearing that, the spy pondered for a while and made a decision in his heart. Apart from the 3 grain stores of the Lus, the other 28 grain stores were hoping to make a fortune this time. Seeing that the people who were buying grain had gone to their competitors' stores, they were anxious. 2 of the stores even decided to lower their prices the next day. When they heard the news, they were all excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. 1,900 don was not much even if it was divided among the 28 grain stores. If they could buy this batch of grain from the Lus, they could naturally continue to raise the price and still make a profit. Now the news of the civil unrest in Sangzhou was getting more and more intense. The refugees not only affected Zisong County, but also spread to Hejin County. It was a good opportunity to make a fortune. If they missed this opportunity, they would not get another one. How could they let the Lus ruin it? In a word, buy. Therefore, on the 3rd day, the 3 grain stores of the Lus welcomed a large number of people who were buying grain. It also drove the real buyers to make up their minds to buy grain. They had all heard the rumor that the cheap grain of the Lus was running out. If they did not buy now, they would have to buy grain with sky-high prices in the future. If they could not afford it, they would starve to death. On the 3rd day, the business of the grain stores reached its peak. Even when the grain stores were closed, there were still many people who did not buy grain wandering in front of the doors. The shopkeeper and the clerk could only persuade them to leave in a gentle voice. Today's grain is sold out. If you want to buy more, come back tomorrow. The grain stores are closing now. The people looked at each other. In their hearts, they thought that the shopkeeper was just saying perfunctorily. They were very disappointed. On the fourth day, the business of the grain stores was still good, but they closed before noon, which further confirmed the rumor that the grain stores were running out of grain. Humph, the Lu County chief has made great achievements in governing the region, but he knows nothing about business. He is so stupid to give up a watermelon and throw away a sesame seed. Many people laughed in their hearts. The Lus did make a lot of money, but that was all. If they had been patient, they could have made 5 or 6 times the money, or even more. On the 5th day, the grain stores in Hejin County seemed to have reached an agreement. They all adjusted the prices of their grain stores. The prices were set. If they did not want to buy, they could wait for their whole family to starve to death. However, the expected customers did not come. After asking carefully, the shopkeepers of several grain stores almost had a heart attack. They thought that the grain stores of the Lus would not open today, but the people found that they opened earlier than usual. Hey, what is this? The people looked at the sign outside the grain stores and did not understand it. This is a limited purchase. At this time, a man in a green scholar's robe was standing in the crowd with a feather fan in his hand. Who else could it be but Chiguan Rang? What is a limited purchase? Out of 100 people, 99 were illiterate. How could they understand a limited purchase? The people respected the scholar. They all made way for Chiguan Rang so that he could read the sign. He calmly walked forward and read the content of the sign clearly. Then he explained in a way that the people could understand. The grain stores are still open, but each person can only buy 2 days' worth of grain for a family of 4. We will not sell more than that. Limited purchase? They had never seen or heard of such a way of selling. Many people found it hard to get used to it. If this was the case, didn't it mean that they had to go to the grain stores every 2 or 3 days? Why couldn't they sell it all at once? Chapter 244. Although there was cheap food, there was still a restriction on the purchase, which made many people feel disgusted and repelled. Hejin County was not a big place, but it was not small either. It was really troublesome to go to a grain store just to buy 1 or 2 days' worth of food. Is there no food in your store? Why do you want to limit the purchase instead of making money? A man's voice came from the crowd. He was wearing sackcloth and his hair was tied up with straw rope. He looked like an ordinary farmer. At this moment, the people gathered in front of the grain store seemed to have been enlightened. They started chattering. It's okay if there's no food. Why are you tormenting us? There are other stores in Hejin County that sell food even if you don't sell. The world is not safe now. What if you run into bad people when you travel so far just for a little food? What he said was exactly what many people were thinking. They were even more worried. That's right. Taking the risk to travel so far away for such a small amount of food, isn't this harming others? Yes, do you have food or not? Give us a definite answer. If you do, sell it. If you don't waste our time. We can buy from other stores. If we are delayed by you and the price of the food rises again, will you be responsible? You are so evil. I don't see you selling it much cheaper than others. Why are you playing these tricks? Are you going to sell it or not? If not, leave. Many people in the crowd shouted. They were all pointing at the grain store and trying to shake the people's hearts. Chiguan Rang stood calmly at the side. Others might not be able to tell, but he could tell that those who were trying to sow discord were not malicious. Rather than saying that they were trying to sow discord, it would be more accurate to say that they were trying to stir up the atmosphere and mislead the people. Therefore, he didn't stand out to explain the benefits of the purchase restriction. Instead, he looked at the grain store with a playful smile. He wanted to see what other tricks Lu Langjun had up his sleeves. Seeing that many people were provoked, the manager of the grain store hurriedly lifted his clothes and crossed the threshold. His face was full of fear. He bowed to the crowd, and the noise of the crowd finally calmed down a little. "Folks, I'm running a small business. It's all thanks to your help that I can stand firm here in Hajin County." The shopkeeper was lying through his teeth, but the commoners liked to hear such flattering words. Their emotions were once again comforted. Who doesn't know how to say nice things? "Do you guys have any food here? It wasn't easy for me to gather enough money to buy more." "Why are you trying to limit the purchase? Are you trying to offend me on purpose?" Someone in the crowd spoke up with an unreasonable attitude. The shopkeeper was so busy that his forehead was covered in hot sweat. He smiled bitterly and said, "My fellow villagers, your words are harsh. My store had originally set up this limit for the good of everyone. Why is it that in your mouth, it's looking for trouble? Of course, we have plenty of food. Then why did you set a purchase restriction? Do you still want to do business?" Before the shopkeeper could finish his words, he was interrupted by the voice again. At this time, the crowd faintly sympathized with the shopkeeper. His service attitude was quite good, and he was humble as well. Unfortunately, he had encountered someone with a bad temper. How pitiful was he now? "Of course we want to do business, but we can't not limit the purchase." The shopkeeper bowed again and said seriously, "Nowadays, the world is not stable. Who doesn't want to fill their own rice tank to the brim? But recently, the price of food has skyrocketed. My fellow villagers have also seen it. You know you're selling at a high price, but you don't know how to sell at a lower price. Who are you trying to fool?" Chiguan Rang listened to the conversation between the shopkeeper and the shill and almost laughed out loud. Lu Langjun was indeed a clever person. The other party even dared to use such a despicable method. The shopkeeper patted his chest and said to the crowd, "You can't say it like that. Who doesn't want to earn money when doing business?" The crowd listened quietly. The shopkeeper had already memorized the script in his heart and spoke passionately. "But business has its own rules. This kind of act of looting a burning house is not something that my store will stoop to. But why is it still marked at such a high price today? It's because we have no other choice. Everyone, think about it. If my store continues to sell at a low price, will the villagers buy more, or will the people who want to take the opportunity to make a fortune buy more? Yesterday, my store and the other two stores sold a total of 2,000 don. Sold for 2,000 don. This business was not bad. Since there was so much surplus, why didn't they sell it or limit the purchase?" Everyone was confused, but some people already understood what was going on. They guessed that the 2,000 don were most likely bought by those who wanted to store food and not by the people who really needed it. "If we continue to sell at this rate, in less than 7 or 8 days, our store's granary will be emptied." The shopkeeper's words sounded weak. Not to mention 7 or 8 days, they probably wouldn't even last for 2 or 3 days. The owner of the store thought about it and came up with the idea of limiting the purchase so that the people who really need it can buy it. After limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now. No matter how many flowery words there were, they couldn't beat the phrase, "After limiting the purchase, the price will be lower than it is now." Nowadays, the food in the store was indeed more expensive than usual, but it was much cheaper than the food that was 9 or 10 times more expensive. Many people could afford it if they gritted their teeth. With that, many people's hearts began to waver and they started to lean towards the store. The shopkeeper took the opportunity to add fuel to the fire and said in a clear voice, "My fellow villagers, although the world is difficult, with the blessings of God, we should have a small harvest this year. In another 2 or 3 months, you should start preparing for the autumn harvest. By then, the food will have recovered and you won't have to worry about starvation." To be honest, the store doesn't make much money by limiting purchases. But if everyone can survive until then, earning less money doesn't matter. At the very least, they would feel at ease. Don't you think that's the case? Business is business, and business has its own principles. Qiguan Rang raised the feather fan in his hand to cover the smile on his face. Lu Longjuan's move was really beautiful. If it were anyone else, they would have been tortured to death by the restriction on the purchase. After all, this move had affected the interests of many people. Unfortunately, Lu Langjun was of noble birth. He was the only legitimate son of the second branch of the Lu family. As long as Lu Shi didn't fall, the gentry in Hejin County would be afraid of him. The restriction on the purchase made many black-hearted merchants eager to make a fortune. So what if they lost money? If they wanted to make a move on Lu Shi, they had to see if Lu Shi would agree. The business of the Lu family's grain store was still booming. There was an endless stream of people buying food. For them, even if they had to travel for a few more hours, it was all worth it as long as they could buy cheap food. This is what a real businessman should be like. Many people sincerely exclaimed, especially when they found out that the other grain stores didn't lower the price, but instead raised the price. They admired them even more. Lanting, this is what you call gaining both fame and fortune. Chapter 245. She smiled and said, "The timing, location, and people are all on my side. It's mostly luck that I can succeed this time." Qiguan Rang nodded in agreement. It's really luck this time. If Lu Shi was not in the Lus but in Hu County, Jiang Pengji would have to go through a lot of trouble to succeed. Not to mention the brutal methods of assassination. In ordinary business competitions, there were many other dirty methods to kill without spilling blood. Those who were greedy for money would have many ways to ruin her reputation. Even if Jiang Pengji had good intentions, if her opponents wanted to bully her, she would make a big fuss. It was impossible to implement the purchase restriction. The root cause was that the people were too easily fooled. They believed whatever they heard and rarely had the ability to make their own judgments. Based on this situation, the grain price won't be higher than the price set by the grain store. Jiang Pengji took a sip of tea and mumbled, "I hope we can survive until the autumn harvest. That way, the people won't have a large-scale food shortage. We can't let our guard down because of this." After all, the civil unrest in Meng County in Sang Prefecture has spread to Hejin County and other counties. How to settle the people is a big problem. If they couldn't control the people, the local public security would be greatly reduced. Jiang Pengji raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "That's the problem of the Hejin County chief and other aristocrats. It's not our turn to worry about it." Qiguan Rang choked. They were both commoners without any official titles. Why would they worry about such things? Jiang Pengji said, "Compared to these things, Wenjing should think about how to be a bridegroom. Wei Nyangzi is still young, so please bear with her." "Of course." Qiguan Rang's expression softened a little, revealing a sense of warmth. Jiang Pengji teased Qiguan Rang, and the latter reacted accordingly. On the other side, the streaming room was a bit gloomy. Why? Because Jiang Pengji did not play by the rules. She traveled from the stars to ancient times to be a streamer, so she could be considered a time traveler, right? According to the usual plot of transmigration novels, as long as there was a decent man by her side, he would have a different kind of feeling for her. There could be only one male protagonist, but the friendly male supporting characters had to be from the second row to the third row. After watching the streaming for a few months, only a few men appeared, and only a few of them were attractive. Qiguan Rang was getting married. Brainless smashing jar, I'm not happy. I thought that Qiguan Rang would be the streamer's CP. Sparks of love could be ignited between them. They usually get along quite well. I didn't expect that Qiguan Rang would really get married. It's so frustrating to choose the wrong CP. Hey Yida, I remember that Qiguan Rang is now married for the second time. How do you think he and the streamer are a good match? Cafeteria Daffin Auntie, #rested chin. Although I quite like this style, I feel that Qiguan Rang is not suitable for the streamer. Their personalities overlap in some areas, and they are birds of a feather. They are more like bad friends. Moreover, the streamer is so young. That's right, although I don't know how old the host was in the past, she looks like she's 12 now. She'll only be 13 next year. Chun-Li, starting from 3 years, the highest penalty is death. Raising a chestnut, 3 years of hard work, the death penalty is not a loss. Heart as clear as ice, rested my chin on my hand. Although the lowly love of the uncle was not bad, I liked the childhood sweetheart even more. Jinyan Dajiba, I like Suka more. I don't mind the CP of a loyal dog and its Sundra master. Zaguoj Chestnut, according to what you said, the young man named Han Yu is also not bad. He and the streamer are a happy quarrelsome CP. Even Lu Shi, a legitimate father, was not worried about his daughter's marriage. The viewers in the streaming room had already begun to dig up all kinds of men that Jiang Pengji had met, hoping to find Jiang Pengji's future husband from among them. Lo Siji Lianmeng, why are you worrying so much? It's not certain whether the streamer will marry in the future. His words shocked everyone present. The viewers in the streaming room reacted one after another. According to Jiang Pengji's character, there was really no need to worry about that. Lo Siji Lianmeng, in my opinion, the men you mentioned are not a good match for the streamer. First of all, they are a few years older than the streamer. According to the ancient tradition of early marriage and early childbirth, when the streamer is 17 or 18 years old, they are either married or preparing for a second marriage after their wives pass away. Do you think the streamer will be a mistress or a second wife? The viewer's words made many people feel uncomfortable. Just thinking about that kind of scene was enough to make them feel sick. The streamer's excellence was obvious to all. Wasn't it because of Jiang Pengji's charm that many viewers followed her for so long? If even such a person had to be a mistress or a second wife, it would be like eating delicacies that had been left out overnight. Lo Siji Lianmeng, the streamer still has a long way to go. It's too early to talk about relationships. The world is so big. There will be more outstanding people. Why should you limit your vision to a few people? Qiguan Rang will not be the streamer's CP. They will only be good friends. Although Jiang Pengji did not care about the bullet screen in the streaming room, Lo Siji Lianmeng did win her heart. While paying attention to the bullet screen, she chatted happily with Qiguan Rang. Will Lanting go to Shangjing with Lu County Chief soon? Qiguan Rang suddenly brought up the topic and said regretfully, I thought I could invite Lanting to the wedding, but it seems that we are not fated to do so. Well, it's time to leave. The Mengs are going to investigate soon. Although I am confident that I am clean and did not leave any clues, it is hard to say that the Mengs will not suspect me. Jiang Pengji shook her head and said, not only that, my father and Mr. Wei Yuan have recommended me to study in Langyi. I will leave here sooner or later. But I can't be there for your wedding, but I will send the gift. It was time to go somewhere else to avoid the storm. Han Yu had said that Jiang Pengji would not be able to find anything if she went to Langyi County because Master Yuan Jing was going to take his students to Shangjing to participate in the evaluation. Lu Shi was the general evaluation officer of this year. Jiang Pengji would be going to Shangjing with him and she would meet Master Yuan Jing. Qiguan Rang sighed with emotion. I don't know when we can meet again. Jiang Pengji smiled and said, when I need you. They looked at each other and smiled. At that time, Qiguan Rang would also join them to make trouble. But before that, she had to find other talents. She couldn't rely on Suku alone. What if he got sick from exhaustion? Not to mention how furious the shopkeepers of the other grain shops in Hejian County were. After some publicity, the price of grain in Hejian County had gradually stabilized. Although it was still more expensive than usual, ordinary people could still afford it, and their families would not starve to death. Chapter 246. My husband has just come back from the court meeting. How did he become like this? Feng Jin's mother heard from the servants that her husband Feng Ren had come back from the court meeting, so she hurried out of the main room to welcome him. With just one glance, she found that her husband was reprimanded in the court meeting and she felt sorry for him. If he was not reprimanded, How could a neatly dressed husband come back from the court meeting with tea stains on his forehead? There has been civil unrest in Meng County in Sangzhou since a few months ago. Now that a letter has been sent to the palace, it is no wonder that the emperor is not angry. Feng Ren said carelessly. He took the handkerchief from his wife and wiped his face. He sighed and said, now the civil unrest is uncontrollable and it has spread to the counties near Sangzhou. People are homeless and bandits are everywhere. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline are demanding an exorbitant price. Of course, the emperor wants to vent his anger. Madame Feng looked serious and said angrily, my husband is the head of the secretariat, but the emperor doesn't even give him face. If this gets out, how can he deter the other officials in the future? Not to mention the civil unrest of the Meng family in Sangzhou. Those who are not deaf or blind would know something about it. Isn't it his own fault that the emperor only got the letter now? He just wants to vent his anger on my husband. Feng Ren snorted. He did not like what the emperor was doing at the moment. However, his wife had a bad temper, and she was so protective of him. He felt warm in his heart. He could not help but raise his hand to hold Madame Feng's delicate and soft hands. I am fine. Madam, please don't get angry so easily. Anger hurts the liver. I am worried about you. Madame Feng glanced at Feng Ren and said angrily, you are going to have a family and a career. You are so old and you are still so improper. It has been so many years, but you are still so shy. It makes me look bad. Feng Ren smiled gently and the couple went back to the main courtyard hand in hand. Madame Feng asked the servants to prepare hot soup so that Feng Ren could take a comfortable bath and change into a clean spring shirt. Alas, even so. Feng Ren sat in front of the table. His wife was holding an embroidery rod and was carefully embroidering a black plum blossom picture. Your behavior has indeed disappointed many officials. They are always having fun in Shangyang Palace and don't care about the outside world. Which emperor did not want to wield the power of the world and lie on the knees of beauties when drunk? Now, the emperor of Dongqing had been practicing the latter. Shangyang Palace was a real harem with 3,000 beauties. His Majesty had also issued a palace order that all the women in the palace were not allowed to wear underwear so that he could have fun at any time. Every time Feng Ren entered the palace, he did not dare to take a second look, for fear that he would see something unsightly. If that was the case, it would have been fine, but the emperor just had to like to go to the homes of his ministers for a short visit. Who knew how many wives of his ministers had been fooled by him? It was absurd beyond compare. Compared to the previous emperor of Dongqing, Emperor Yang of Qing, it was no less frightening. He had ascended the throne for many years, but the number of times he attended court could be counted on one hand. Indulging in beauty, unable to extricate himself. Occasionally, Feng Ren also doubted whether he would die on a woman's belly because of his indulgence in lust. Although the aristocratic families were now in power, this had a lot to do with the emperor's indulgence in sensual pleasures and neglect of court affairs. The more power the aristocratic families had, the more they impeded the imperial power. The more the emperor could not enjoy the pleasure of ruling over the world. He was controlled everywhere, and the more he indulged in sensual pleasures, the less he cared about court affairs, and the more power the aristocratic families had, the more it was a vicious cycle. He was ambitious but did not like to manage court affairs. He wanted to suppress the aristocratic families and regain his power, but he did not have the ability. How could there be such a good thing in the world? The current emperor of Dongqing, other than having more sons than his brother and being able to sleep with several women at night, had nothing else to show. Feng Ren was calm. Even if he was called to the study room by the emperor and smashed a cup of tea, he could still chat with his wife calmly. Who cares? Madame Feng said carelessly, they have been crazy for a long time. Look at you, there's a cut on your forehead. Put some ointment on it and don't eat much for a few days, in case there's a scar left after you recover. Other than the first emperor of Dongqing, who had some achievements and ambition, the others were useless and useless. If it was not for the fact that the Feng family needed people in the imperial court, she would not want her husband to be the head of the secretariat. It was said that the emperor was dead and the aristocratic families were made of iron. No matter how bad the Feng family was, it would not be that bad. It did not matter if the royal family wanted to die or not. Her husband had written 4 or 5 memorials to remind the emperor about the Tsang prefecture and Meng county. However, the emperor was busy with his new favorite. If it was not for important matters, he did not want to see Feng Ren at all. The memorials he wrote 2 years ago were still gathering dust. Why would he read the memorials Feng Ren wrote a few months ago? Now he was angry. What was the use? I am worried about Huayu. He is now with the 4th prince. I don't know if he will run into mobs on the way. The children will have their own fortune. Don't you always say that? Why are you so worried when Erlang has only been away for a few months? Madame Feng put the embroidery cloth beside her and took out a sealed letter from the table. Huayu, you care too little about him. He took the letter and saw that it was written by Lu Shi. Feng Ren said. He only found out about Feng Jin's situation a few years ago. At that time, Feng Jin's character had already formed. He wanted to correct it but was afraid that it would backfire. He could only blame his wife for paying too much attention to the eldest son and loving the youngest son. They neglected the second son. Erlang is already at the age to start a family. Why are you more worried than me? What did Lu Feng write? Feng Ren read quickly. He lowered his eyebrows and smiled. Madam, you just laughed at me for being frivolous. Look at him. He is frivolous. He gave up his job as the county chief and came to be a matchmaker. Madame Feng did not avoid the topic. She picked up the letter and read it carefully. She had an idea. I have never heard of this lady from the Wei family. Feng Jin's brother had been engaged and it was his turn now. So Madame Feng had been looking for suitable ladies for the past 6 months. She was hesitating. I don't know what her temperament is, you can find out if you check. I am afraid that the lady that Lu Shi likes is not too bad. Feng Ren said, the Wei family in Hejian. Huayu can be a good match. If she has a good temperament and Huayu has no objection, she can be chosen. The Feng family was a big family. Feng Jin's brother was the eldest son of the legal wife. His wife would be the future wife of the family. Naturally, they had to carefully select her. Her family background, talent, and appearance must be good. But Feng Jin was the second son of the legal wife, so the requirements were not so strict. It was not that they did not treat Feng Jin well. They were afraid that sisters-in-law with similar status would easily have thoughts that they should not have, which would not be good for the family. Therefore, the status of Feng Jin's wife was not important. They valued her character, talent, and temperament more. If there was a shrewd and ambitious woman who instigated Feng Jin and his brother to fight for the family property, it would not work. Chapter 247. Lu Shi and Feng Ren were friends of gentlemen, and they had a good relationship in private. They usually talked about their literary ideals and political affairs. They rarely talked about their work. This kind of friendship and the way they got along with each other made Feng Ren feel relaxed. Naturally, their relationship was not bad. My husband always said that Lu County Chief was an idiot. I believe it now. Madame Feng put the letter away with a smile. Although it was an encrypted letter, there was nothing shameful in it. It was nothing more than talking about daily life, describing what had happened in the past few years, expressing his longing, and acting as a matchmaker. He talked about how he was about to leave for Shangjing and didn't have a place to stay. He asked Feng Ren to help him arrange a place so that he wouldn't have to sleep in the open. The content was humorous. It didn't sound like the tone of the famous Lu County Chief at all. It sounded more like a boy who hadn't grown up. He's even more idiotic. Feng Ren opened his mouth, but he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He said vaguely, anyway, you can't just judge a person by his appearance. He looks beautiful, but inside, he's a pervert. Feng Ren and his wife had been married for many years and their relationship was getting better and better. They talked for a while and got up to have dinner together. At the same time, the news that Feng Ren, the head of the secretariat, was reprimanded by the emperor and even smashed a teacup had spread to all the families in Shangjing. Those with ordinary family backgrounds felt insecure. Those with great power in the court just looked on coldly. They all thought that Feng Ren would be angry and stay at home for a few days after being wronged. They didn't know that he still did what he was supposed to do the next day. Except for the mark on his forehead, there was no difference. Some old officials who were clear-minded couldn't help but sigh when they saw it. The emperor had completely offended Feng Ren. So what if he was the head of the secretariat? There were countless high-ranking officials in the Feng family. Would they care about the position of the head of the secretariat? It seemed to be an important position, but in fact, the emperor was always afraid of Feng Ren and the Feng family. Under such circumstances, how could they expect the Feng family to serve the country wholeheartedly? Feng Ren didn't get angry, not because he had a good temper, but because it wasn't worth getting angry. Due to the civil unrest in Meng County of Tsang Prefecture, the surrounding counties were affected as well. The people were wailing in pain and suffering. Along the way, people in ragged clothes could be seen everywhere. Many of the refugees from Meng County had fled to other counties with their children, creating a huge security and public order problem for the local area. The roving bandits took the opportunity to wreak havoc, burning, killing, and looting. In such a big environment, Hejin County seemed to be exceptionally peaceful. Most of the bandits had been cleaned up by Jiang Pengji. She selected some of them and incorporated them. Not only did they not become a hidden danger, but they contributed to the peace around Hejin County. While other places were immersed in dark clouds, this place seemed peaceful. The purchase restriction in the grain store was carried out smoothly. The other gentry families in Hejin County didn't dare to vent their anger when they saw that the leader was from the Lu family. What was more surprising was that the grain store of the Wei family also took the initiative to adjust the policy and limited the people's purchase at a low price. At least they know how to return the favor, Lu Shi smiled faintly when he heard the news. Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes and asked, "Did father really step forward to be a matchmaker for Jing, and Huayu?" Lu Shi snorted. What else? If they didn't have such a handsome son-in-law, how could the Wei family be so generous? When Jiang Pengji implemented the purchase restriction, although the Wei family didn't kick them when they were down, they were just watching from the sidelines. Now that Jiang Pengji had introduced the purchase restriction, no one would believe it if they didn't have a secret deal. If that's the case, I'm relieved. Huayu is a noble person. He will treat Jingxian well. Jiang Pengji didn't think too much about it. Wei Jingxian marrying Feng Jin was better than marrying Wu Majun, wasn't it? Other things aside, Feng Jin's character was still trustworthy. Lu Shi secretly shook his head. His daughter was so kind. Based on the current situation, the marriage between Feng Jin and Wei Jingxian seemed to be perfect, but in the future, his daughter might have to bear double the pain, but it was too early to say that. Who knew what the future would be like? Lu Shi skipped the topic and said to Jiang Pengji, "It will be the autumn harvest in a month, and I will be going to Shangjing to meet the emperor. Ask your aunt to prepare the things you will need on the way. It's your first time going out, so you should be well prepared." "Okay." Lu Shi said, "Pick some of the troops to follow us and protect us on the way. The rest will stay in Hejin County." Jiang Pengji's troops had expanded to 1,500 people, and that was the result of her careful selection. She couldn't take all 1,500 people with her. At most, she could take 40 to 50 people with her. The rest had to stay where they were. Jiang Pengji nodded. In fact, she didn't want to expose all of them. The quality of the troops varied. Everyone needed to be polished and trained. Even if Lu Shi didn't say so, she would do it anyway. "Father, don't worry. I have asked Xiaoyu to pick suitable followers. The rest will stay in Hejin County for now. Wenjing will take care of them." Although Qiguan Rang hadn't officially joined the team, Jiang Pengji didn't want to waste such a good labor force. Su Ke definitely couldn't stay, but Meng Hun still couldn't manage a troop of 1,000 people neatly. After all, internal affairs weren't his strong point. Besides, his current identity was a little sensitive, and he needed to avoid the Mengs. Most of the time, he couldn't appear openly. Fortunately, Qiguan Rang would stay in Hejin County. He could more or less take over Su Ke's work, so she didn't have to worry about the troops. Although the departure would take more than a month, the preparations had already begun. In the ancient times, when transportation and information were not developed, it was not easy to travel far. Jiang Pengji habitually broadcast every day. Because the content was monotonous and boring, she didn't meet any interesting people or things. Most of the time, it was the audience who entertained themselves with the bullet screen. Jiang Pengji sometimes read the bullet screen to kill time. Unknowingly, the autumn harvest was approaching. The fields were yellow, and farmers and tenants were working everywhere. The purchase restriction that had lasted for 2 months had also come to an end, and the price of grain had returned to normal. The stone that had been pressing down on everyone's hearts had finally been removed. From the adults to the children, everyone revealed a relaxed and happy smile, temporarily forgetting the chaos in the outside world. The number of the troops stabilized at 1,500 people. Their main task was to train. Occasionally, they would have other additional tasks. For example, farm work. Because the civil unrest hadn't been effectively controlled, the outside world was still relatively chaotic. People were rushing to harvest the grain. They were afraid that the harvest would be ruined if they were late. However, every household was understaffed, so the harvest was not fast. Jiang Pengji happened to hear the tenants talking about it. After discussing with Su Ke, they decided to rent out all the troops to do farm work. They were strong, hard-working, and they only needed to eat their fill every day. Su Ke was speechless. He really didn't want to say that he knew this handsome Lang Jun. Chapter 248. Lang Jun, you mustn't. Su Ke moved quickly, intending to stop Jiang Pengji, who wanted to help. It was not that he thought she was a noble person and could not work like a farmer, but that he was busy enough and did not want to add to the mess. Jiang Pengji turned her head and asked Su Ke in confusion, "Why are you stopping me? There are no monsters in the fields." At that moment, the audience in the streaming room had started to become teachers, teaching Jiang Pengji how to do farm work. Even if she did not know how to do it before, she could now follow the guide given by her friends in the streaming room. Su Ke was looking down on her. Su Ke was speechless. After a while, he said, "Lang Jun, you are a noble person. How can you work like a peasant?" Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him with a faint look in her eyes. "Speak like a human." Su Ke's face turned green. After a while, he said, "We are busy with the autumn harvest. Lang Jun, don't add to the mess." Jiang Pengji was speechless. She did not want to look at the ha on the streaming screen. In the past, it was always Su Ke who felt sorry for him. This time, it was her turn to feel sorry for him. Lo Siji Lianmeng, light a candle for this honest boy. He actually said that. Zwizhen Beishijing, I was drinking and almost choked. Su Ke was looking for trouble. Even if he thought that, he could not say it out loud. I think the streamer's expression is about to change. Hey, young man, you have to be careful. He is going to make things difficult for you. Mo Wuhuashi, #propping chin. Su Ke is not following the routine. According to the usual routine, he should be secretly moved. After all, the streamer was willing to put down her pride and work in the fields. It was a necessary quality for a wise ruler, but he actually despised the streamer. Yun Shimao, do any of you remember the streamer's background? Speaking of which, did she still see crops in her era? I really wondered if the streamer knew which were grains and which were straws. Jiang Pengji was shot in the knee. She had indeed never seen real crops. It was like the audience in the streaming room had never seen a pig run, but they had eaten pork. But they could not look down on her knowledge just because of that, okay? Host V, don't you have the bullet screen to guide us? Lo si lianmeng, most of them are from Baidu. I don't know if they are useful. Jiang Pengji was speechless. Nai Bao Bao, actually, I'm curious. Agriculture still existed in the host's era, right? Fully automatic machines are used for harvesting? Jiang Pengji stared at Su Ke silently, but he didn't budge. She squatted on the ridge of the field and looked at the farmers who were working. It looked like he was defeated, but he was actually chatting with the audience in the live broadcast room. Host V, do you know what it means to be a farmer in my time? 2 words, rich. The viewers in the live stream room expressed their shock and sent a series of exclamation marks. How much money can you make from farming? Jiang Pengji thought about it and used a very vivid metaphor to give them a general idea. Host V, all of you have seen the great universal geographical map of Dongqing, right? You know the approximate size of this country. The audience in the live streaming room expressed that they knew about it. After all, the great geographical map of Dongqing was hanging in her study room. It was hard not to see it. In terms of land area, it was about 1/6 of their era's Hua nation, and slightly larger. This was the result of a data guru in the live broadcast room after combining the various data provided by the host. And then? Host V, it looks like a large land area, but it's about the size of a small or medium-sized farm. In other words, the land area of the Emperor of Dongqing is less than that of a small or medium-sized farm owner in her time. The audience in the live streaming room, Lao Siji Lianmeng, I may have drunk fake wine and watched fake live streams. I suddenly can't look at the term farm owner. Xiao Xiao Gui, can't look at it directly +1. I suddenly feel that my family's rural household is suddenly much more lofty. Moonlight treasure box, can't look at it directly +2. The urban household is trembling. A farm that was 1/6 of the land area of Hua Nation was completely unimaginable. However, would a farm owner be able to manage such a large farm? He should be able to, right? But they couldn't imagine what it would be like. Lo Siji Lianmeng, wait a minute. I seem to have analyzed a very scary fact. If there were such large farms in the host's time, obviously the earth could no longer meet the needs of the farm owners. Would there be the existence of agricultural planets? In other words, the host's time was already interstellar. Just like what many interstellar novels imagined, there were many planets in the universe that were suitable for the survival of living creatures. Some planets were specially divided for farming, which gave rise to such terrifying farm owners. The audience in the live streaming room were all excited after being reminded by him. Jiang Pengji didn't know what they were excited about. She quietly looked at the 2 or 3 tenant farmers who were working together on a piece of land. The audience in the live streaming room couldn't imagine how the farm owners in her time managed such a large farm as Dongqing because they had never seen it with their own eyes. Jiang Pengji hadn't seen the autumn harvest with her own eyes, so she couldn't imagine how the farmers harvested the grain. Su Ke saw that Jiang Pengji was so quiet and he felt anxious. He changed his words and said, if you're really curious, you should get a tenant farmer who is familiar with the field to guide you. The grain seems to be nothing, but if it's harvested improperly, it can easily cause lumbar muscle strain and scratches on the hands and feet. Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him. Then go find a tenant farmer. The audience in the live streaming room could only copy and paste on Baidu. They were no better than her. Su Ke had no choice but to get up and find an experienced tenant farmer. He hoped that his Lang Jun would know the difficulty and stop tormenting herself. Why don't you use tools? Jiang Pengji's understanding of the ancient times was limited. Even if she came to this era and searched for information from books and the outside world, she still needed to see many things with her own eyes. She didn't have the actual objects in her mind, so she couldn't imagine it. The old tenant farmer was in fear and trepidation. Lang Jun, there are farming tools, but they are rare and the cattle are precious. Usually, 3 or 4 households share them. When one household finishes harvesting, it's the next one's turn. If they are experienced, their speed isn't slow. In fact, it relied more on manpower than the power of tools. Jiang Pengji followed the direction of the old tenant farmer's finger and saw a farmer using rough farming tools. She frowned slightly. She couldn't imagine using manpower to harvest the grain. Not to mention the big farm owners, even the small farm owners wouldn't be able to harvest all the grain in their lifetime. Chapter 249. Old man, please teach me how to do it. I'll learn. Jiang Pengji smiled. She rolled the wide hem up to her knees and secured it with a rope, revealing a pair of slender white calves. As for the sleeves, she tied them up with a rope to make it easier for her to walk. Xiao xiao gui, the rope to secure the sleeves looks like it's from Japan, Lo Siji Lianmeng, sleeves, also known as arm ropes. They're not from Japan. In fact, people in ancient China used ropes to secure sleeves so that they wouldn't get in the way of their work. But no one was wearing a robe with wide sleeves, so they didn't need it. Well, he was being taught a lesson. Jiang Pengji secured the sleeves with Su Ku's help. She stood beside the old tenant farmer and listened attentively to him teaching her how to harvest the grains. After all, the old tenant farmer had worked in the fields his whole life, so he was very experienced. Although he was old and had gray hair on his temples, he was no slower than the young men. He was even faster than them. At that moment, Su Ku keenly sensed that his Langjun's mood was a bit weird. He thought to himself, does Langjun think it's too difficult? However, the scene that followed refreshed his worldview and limits. Langjun, who was thought to be inattentive, only needed to watch it once. The old tenant farmer told her some things to pay attention to, and she was able to do it by herself. Langjun, you're really smart. You're much smarter than my grandson. The old tenant farmer was so happy that he complimented her, but he realized he had said something wrong after he finished. How could they compare the status of his grandson and the Langjun in front of him? If his grandson couldn't learn this skill, he would probably starve to death. Langjun, on the other hand, could live a luxurious life even though she didn't know what the grains looked like. When he thought of this, the old tenant farmer was so scared that his legs trembled. His face turned pale, and he almost fell to his knees. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji revealed a very happy smile and spoke to him in a gentle and soft voice. It's not hard to see, but you need to pay attention to your posture and strength. Otherwise, your whole body will hurt. The old tenant farmer didn't know how to control his posture and strength, but he had accumulated a lifetime's worth of experience. Su Ku stood to the side, and his face turned slightly better. Jiang Pengji didn't seem to realize that the old tenant farmer had said something offensive. Instead, she quickly harvested the rest of the rice. A quarter of an hour later, she sat on the ridge of the field, swinging her 2 slender white legs. Her forehead was faintly covered in a thin layer of sweat. Langjun, do you want to apply some medicine? Su Ku held a small brown bottle in his hand, which contained a plaster that could remove blood stasis and stop bleeding. Jiang Pengji looked at his hand, then looked at her calves and feet, which were scratched by the grains and foreign objects. She understood and shook her head. She pointed to the seat beside her and gestured for him to sit down. That old farmer didn't mean to offend you. Su Ku was sensitive to other people's emotions, and he had a better understanding of his Langjun. He knew that she was not in a good mood. No matter how he thought about it, it seemed like the old tenant farmer's words were the only thing that offended him and made him unhappy. However, Su Ku was wrong this time. Jiang Pengji had many flaws. She was capricious, arrogant, and unruly. It seemed to be a common failing of the aristocratic families in this era. However, Jiang Pengji was different from those people. She would not hurt the weak and innocent, not to mention that the old farmer had no ill intentions. Are you pleading on behalf of someone else? Jiang Pengji couldn't help but laugh. She said, Xiaoyu, the premise of pleading is that you have to understand the whole story and know the truth. Otherwise, not only will your pleading fail, but it will also add fuel to the fire. I am not angry because of that. Su Ke said seriously, but you are indeed not in a good mood. Jiang Pengji smiled and asked him in return, then do you know why I am not happy? Su Ke was dumbfounded. He even suspected that it was not that she was in a bad mood, but that she was simply using this as a pretext to torment him. Su Ke cupped his hands in front of his chest. His cheeks were slightly red. I don't understand. Please enlighten me. Jiang Pengji did not answer his question. Instead, she asked, do you think I was a burden when I harvested the grains? Su Ke was speechless. Sure enough, it was directed at him. Before Su Ke could recover from his confusion, Jiang Pengji continued, don't think that I look fine now. In fact, my back is aching. Farm work is not something that can be done with strength. If you don't know how to save energy, your muscles will definitely swell and your whole body will ache. Su Ke listened to her quietly and looked at her profile. To be honest, he always felt that his Lengjuan's face was a bit too delicate, like a girl's. But that was the trend nowadays. Men had to put on incense, put on flowers, and dress gorgeously when they went out. A group of enchanting bitches. It was normal for her Lengjun to look delicate. After all, she was still young, and it was hard to distinguish her gender. When she got older, the difference would be huge. It's too hard. Jiang Pengji's current physical fitness was trash in her eyes, but compared to her peers and even adult men, she was a crane in a flock of chickens. With such fitness, she actually felt a bit tired after working for 15 minutes on the farm. She felt that it was not worth it. The hard work and the results were completely disproportionate. But even though she thought that way, the others felt that she was very capable and had a high level of understanding. She was no worse than the experienced tenants. They were not from the same era, so there was a huge gap in their thinking. Lengjun, you don't have to work so hard, Su Ke said. Her identity was different from those tenants. The latter needed to rely on the land, but she did not have to do anything to live a luxurious life. You're wrong to think that way. Jiang Pengji clasped her fingers together and rested her elbows on her knees. I personally went down to the fields to experience it. Only then did I feel that the tenants are working hard. The hard work and sweat of the people are not equal to their harvest. Su Ke was secretly surprised. There were many things that were not equal in this world. If every household had access to more advanced farming tools, it wouldn't take much effort to reap an acre of land without breaking a sweat, and it would increase efficiency. Jiang Pengji murmured. The ideas she had in her head couldn't be implemented in this world. She had to compromise and come up with other ideas. A field that would normally take 2 hours to reap can be done in half a cup of tea's time. Su Ke was speechless. Did his Lengjun? Did she go crazy from working in the fields? I need to go back and think about it. You'll be responsible for the things here. Whoever dares to slack off will be drilled to death by the head instructor. Jiang Pengji seemed to have an idea. She got up and put on the wooden clogs, ignoring Su Ke. Su Ke was speechless. Hey, don't stop halfway through. It's so uncomfortable to keep me in suspense. He reached out his hand, but his Lengjun walked like he was flying. He could walk in the fields with those wooden clogs as if he was walking on flat ground. Chapter 250. What are you drawing, Lengjun? Takshu stroked her long sleeves with one hand and ground an ink block with the other. The air was filled with the fragrance of ink. Jiang Pengji dipped the brush in the ink and started writing on the bamboo paper. The ink lines of different thicknesses were arranged in picturesque disorder on the drawing paper. In a short while, a strange picture was formed. However, no matter how Takshu looked at it, she could not tell what it was. Something useful. Jiang Pengji drew a book from the shelf halfway through. She opened it and read it carefully. Then she sat back at the table and started to make changes on the drawing paper. If it's feasible, it might be of great use. Jiang Pengji wanted to improve the farming tools and use external help to improve work efficiency and save manpower. If she was asked to toss about problems such as mechanical design or aircraft carrier energy core, her academic level would definitely not be able to handle it. However, if it was just designing simple wooden machinery, the difficulty would be greatly reduced. Not to mention, the audience in the live broadcast room could also provide her with friendly reference materials. Therefore, it was not difficult for her to improve the farming tools. The real difficulty was that the tools had to be in line with the current level of technology. She also had to manufacture the tools that she designed. At the same time, she had to consider the cost and maintenance issues. At least, the time and manpower needed to manufacture the tools could not be more than the resources that could be saved by using the tools. Jiang Pengji continued to paint while Takshu stared at her with a confused face. As Lu Shi's personal maid, she had read some books. She was good at writing, but that was all. Nowadays, paintings were more about the artistic conception than the real scene. It was abstract and had meaning. Takshu naturally did not understand three-dimensional paintings. She guessed that no one could understand what she was drawing except for Jiang Pengji and the audience in the streaming room. Lang Jun, it must be very important. Takshu nodded and continued to grind the ink for Jiang Pengji. After a while, she saw that Jiang Pengji had finally stopped. She asked in a low voice, "Lang Jun, do you need some hot soup to cleanse yourself?" Jiang Pengji rode a horse back to the mansion after finishing the farm work. Her calves were exposed, and there were mud stains on them. Her sleeves were stained, and she was sweating. If the gatekeeper did not recognize her face, he would not have let her in. Just based on her previous appearance, people would believe it if they said that she was a tenant farmer of some family. Yes, go and prepare a set of clean clothes. If you didn't mention it, I wouldn't have realized it. I do feel a little uncomfortable. Jiang Pengji was not a clean freak. After all, she was a genetic warrior in her previous life. When she carried out missions assigned by her superiors, what kind of harsh environment had she not encountered? Not to mention getting half of their bodies covered in mud, it was common for them to be stained with the enemy's blood, flesh, and filth. But now that the conditions allowed it, she didn't like to mistreat herself. Jiang Pengji temporarily turned off the live stream and took a shower. She wore a green Confucian robe and sat in front of the table. Her long hair was still damp. Turning on the live broadcast again, her gaze fell on the drawing paper on the desk. Her brows furrowed imperceptibly before relaxing. Why haven't I seen Xuanmei recently? Jiang Pengji dried her wet hair with a towel in one hand and continued to make changes on the drawing paper with the other. Takshu continued to grind and said, "Xuanmei has been keeping watch at night recently. Lang Jun sleeps early, so he naturally did not see her." "Why do you want to see her?" "Oh," Jiang Pengji said, "I just remembered something. Didn't I decide to go to Shangjing with my father? Both of you plan to bring only one of them. It's a long journey, and little girls can't take it. So I want to ask if you are willing to follow me." Takshu giggled. "Lang Jun, you've forgotten about yourself. You've suffered, let alone me and Xuanmei. Since I'm Lang Jun's maid, I'll follow you wherever you go. There's no reason for me to be unwilling to go. Xuanmei would say the same thing if you asked her. But why do you want me and Xuanmei to stay at home?" Jiang Pengji shook her head and answered directly, "I'm going to study, not to seek pleasure. I don't need too many people to serve me. Even so, you can't mistreat yourself." Takshu looked at her with hope. "I want to follow you." Jiang Pengji did not agree immediately. She only said that she would ask for Xuanmei's opinion. Due to the elimination of some stubborn and cruel bandits, the autumn harvest in Hejin County was relatively peaceful. Plus, there was a small bumper harvest, so there was more or less some surplus grain. Jiang Pengji asked Su Ku to calculate the money earned from the few thousand dawn of grain and then purchase grain elsewhere at a lower price. Going back and forth, the original 5,000 dawn of grain could be multiplied. With the grain, Jiang Pengji, the poor person, had a slightly fuller purse. Su Ku was becoming more and more like a meticulous housekeeper. His abacus was crackling, and he could split a penny into two. There was still a lot of room for the grain they earned. He said that it was all because of his Lang Jun. Before leaving, Jiang Pengji climbed over the wall and left the manor. She climbed over Wei Yuan's wall again to look for Qiguan Rang. Qiguan Rang, who almost thought that it was a night attack, was speechless. He pulled his cloak together and took a drawing from Jiang Pengji. There was a drawing of a strange object on it. It's an improved farming tool. Jiang Pengji took a sip of tea. But I have too little experience. This kind of imaginary thing can't achieve the desired effect. I'm handing this over to you. I've also talked to the carpentry workshop in the Lu Manor. You can discuss with the carpentry workshop about how to make it into a usable object. Qiguan Rang listened to her in shock. He suddenly thought of the improved crossbow and was speechless. If Lang Jun can solve this problem, you may become a person who is not inferior to the Mahists. It was a pity that Lu Shi's talent was not limited to farming, but to the world. Jiang Pengji ignored his words and continued, do it in private. Don't let anyone know. Qiguan Rang was from this era, so he understood the pros and cons of it. He cupped his hands and said, don't worry, Lanting. Jiang Pengji said, okay. Thank you. Qiguan Rang was smart and suspicious. Jiang Pengji climbed over the wall to look for him in the middle of the night, and it was the night before they left. He put away the drawing and asked, Lang Jun, do you suspect that there's something wrong with you? Yes. Unexpectedly, Jiang Pengji answered the question. But that's not the main reason. It's just one of the reasons. The other reason is that it's convenient for Wenjing to stay in Hejian. I'll be in Langyi for a while, so I won't be able to take care of him. Then. Chapter 251. The next day, before dawn, 4 carriages quietly left the city under the protection of 50 guards. Although the real owners were Lu Shi and his father, they had prepared 4 carriages. Lu Shi had 1 carriage, Jiang Pengji had another, and the respectable servants had another. The last carriage was filled with miscellaneous items such as clothes, food, clean water, money, and other items to keep warm. The parcels of the entourage and guards were also placed in that carriage. That was after several reductions. According to what the second lady and madam who had prepared, there would have been at least 6 carriages. To put it simply, it was not easy to go on a long journey in ancient times when all aspects of living conditions were abnormally backward. The viewers in the streaming room were shocked and learned something new. Jun Mui, when I watched TV series, I felt that the actors and actresses were all light and simple when they went out. They basically brought a servant girl and a manservant. So, those were fake TV series. The streamer's extravagance is the correct way to go out in ancient times? Jinghong Yulong, Tisk, it's really an entourage. It's so awesome. I feel that the streamer didn't suffer a loss on this trip. Many viewers were very envious. They wished they could experience such luxurious treatment for the streamer. Of course, there were some who were more rational. Lo Ciji Lianmeng, so jealous. Can you believe the TV series? Do you know how undeveloped transportation was in ancient times? Not only transportation, but even the roads were the same. Things like courier stations could not be everywhere. It was common to not see a single living person for 3 to 5 days after a long journey. There were no villages and no shops. Without enough food and water, were they going to starve or die of thirst? Those who had the means to travel far would naturally consider all aspects and take into consideration any unexpected situations. Those who did not have the means could only carry a parcel and some dry food. Everything was light and simple. Not only was the speed slow, but they would also encounter all kinds of dangers along the way. The ancient world was not like the modern world that the audience was living in. There were many tall buildings in the modern world, which greatly reduced the living space of wild animals. Many people had eaten pork, but they had never seen a pig run. However, the ancient world was different. There were dangerous animals running around, and snakes often visited homes. Shaggy Gomji, no, did the person above eat dynamite today? I was just envious. Do you have to be so angry? The bullet screen in the streaming room was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Jiang Pengji did not care. She leaned half of her body on the table and rested. They hadn't left Hejin County yet, so the vibration of the carriage was still within an acceptable range. However, as it was approaching noon, the carriage jolted violently. The audience in the live stream room wondered if the carriage would break apart from the jolting. Jinghong Wandering Dragon, all of a sudden. I'm not envious anymore. I can endure it for a while, but after a while, my bones will be shattered. There were even some audience members who said that the camera was shaking so much that their eyes hurt and they felt a little nauseous. He's already on the main road? Jiang Pengji lifted her hand and lifted the curtain of the carriage. The scenery outside had already turned into a rustling autumn scene. Takshu did not sit in the third carriage. Instead, she followed Jiang Pengji. Judging from the time, we should have left the official road by now. Your servant has prepared a cushion so that you won't feel uncomfortable from the bumps. Why was the traffic in ancient times so blocked? Outdated transportation was one of the reasons. Another important reason was that the roads in this era were not good. Apart from the smoothness and spaciousness of the official road, there wasn't even a road anywhere else. The Lu Mansion's carriage had a more advanced shock absorption system, but it was still so bumpy, let alone an ordinary carriage. No need. I'm going out to ride for a while. Jiang Pengji's physical fitness was excellent, but such a bumpy carriage was too much for her, let alone the frail ancient people. Lu Shi was speechless when he saw Jiang Pengji riding on a tall horse. Naughty girl, be careful on the horse, he reminded her. Riding in a carriage was actually more uncomfortable than riding a horse. He thought that his daughter had gotten off because she couldn't stand the bumps. Okay. Jiang Pengji rode the horse and followed the carriages leisurely. The sun gradually rose in the sky and shone on her body, making her feel warm. It was not convenient to travel in ancient times. Fortunately, Lu Shi was experienced and had prepared everything he could. Lu Shi lifted the curtain of the carriage and said to Jiang Pengji, let's stop and rest for a while. Eat something. Okay. Jiang Pengji responded and informed the carriages to rest in place. Everyone had something to eat before they continued their journey. Xiaoyu, look at your face. Are you sick? When Su Ku got off the carriage, his pale face caught her attention. Look at his lips, they've turned deathly pale. At this moment, Su Ku felt that his whole body was about to fall apart. His legs gave way and he almost knelt on the ground. In such a difficult situation, his Lungjuan's teasing laughter rang in his ears, making him feel even more hopeless. It took him a long time to straighten his back. Su Ku managed to maintain his elegance and smiled at Jiang Pengji. But the smile was very forced. Set up a campfire over there and boil some water to cook jerky. You can drink some later. If the carriage is too bumpy, you can ride a horse. Jiang Pengji was not worried that Su Ku did not know how to ride a horse. The 6 arts of gentlemen were skills that all students in that era had to master. Su Ku cupped his hands and thanked her. Thank you, Lang Jun. What are you thanking me for? Didn't you ask for it? Jiang Pengji looked him up and down with teasing eyes and said in a low voice, Xuanmei went to see you yesterday, right? Alas, if you weren't a blockhead and didn't understand a girl's mind, you would still have a beautiful companion. Su Ku's face turned pale and then green. He hurriedly said, Lang Jun, don't misunderstand. Xuanmei is not, in a rich family, the Langjuan's personal maids were mostly concubines. How could Su Ku dare to think about it? Why are you in such a hurry? Jiang Pengji approached him and sneered. Xuanmei came back with red eyes. Su Ku kept his mouth shut. I treat her like my own sister. I don't have any other thoughts. Plus, Xuanmei has her own thoughts. She may not be willing to be a concubine of a rich family. She likes you very much. Jiang Pengji opened her mouth and Su Ku lowered his head. What do you think? Ku, rejected Xuanmei. Su Ku's voice was as soft as a mosquito. His cheeks were slightly red. Actually, I don't think Xuanmei's choice is a good one. You are not a good match. Su Ku was not good at the moment, but he had a bright future. Jiang Pengji was confident in Su Ku and herself. There were too few men in that era who had their original intentions. Chapter 252. Jiang Pengji crossed her arms and leaned against the side of the carriage. Su Ku felt more and more uncomfortable. He didn't even know where to put his hands. But that girl is quite silly and stubborn. You should know why she chose to stay in Hejin County, right? Su Ku didn't say anything. He didn't know how to respond. He didn't know at first, but since his Lang Jun said so, he naturally understood. She stayed in Hejin County to take care of his aunt. Xuanmei's character was like her name. She was gentle and very kind. It seems that you understand. Jiang Pengji patted his shoulder and whispered with a smile, if you like Xuanmei, remember to come to me and ask for her hand in marriage. If you don't like her, you should make up your mind as soon as possible. Don't waste her time. Su Ku smiled helplessly. His Langjuan's temperament was too unexpected. The audience in the streaming room witnessed the whole conversation. Many people who liked the master-servant couple expressed their heartache. Streamer, you are not a qualified woman from another world. Do you understand? Also, when did Xuanmei and Su Ku hook up? I understand. Su Ku cupped his hands in front of his chest and kept his head down. Only his exposed ears were slightly red. After a short rest and a full meal, they continued their journey. The surrounding environment became more dangerous after leaving Hejin County. Not only did they have to face man-made harm, but they also had to guard against natural disasters. The distance between each relay station wasn't fixed. Sometimes, it would only take half a day to travel from one relay station to the next, while other times, it would take 3 to 4 days. Fortunately, the carriages were equipped with enough rice and water, so the 50 people in the caravan didn't have to worry too much. The journey was very boring. After 5 or 6 days, even the weak Su Ku gradually got used to the bumpy carriage. Although he was still pale, he was much better than before. In comparison, his ability to adapt was not as good as Takshu, a girl from the inner yard. Under such circumstances, the content of the live stream in the streaming room for the past few days was naturally boring. Having seen the scene of traveling in ancient times with their own eyes, they did not envy Jiang Pengji for being able to travel so majestically and ostentatiously. It was simply suffering. Bingtang Lemon, I was quite envious, but now I only feel sorry for her. I lived on the grasslands and rode a horse before. I know how tiring it is to ride a horse for a long time. Looking at the road, I can imagine how bumpy it is inside the carriage. In short, modern society is better. Tianxia Wudi, all of you are staring at the streamer and the carriage. Am I the only one who feels sorry for the guard who has to walk? I counted and found that each of them had worn out 7 or 8 pairs of straw sandals. While we were resting, I saw someone sitting on the ground and picking the blisters on his feet. Nide Yida, you've hit the nail on the head. When I first entered the streaming room, I was wondering why every guard had a string of straw sandals hanging on their shoulders. If I didn't know better, I would have thought that they were weaving straw sandals to sell. Now that I understand, I just feel sad. Lo Siji Lianmeng, I remember when I was in high school, the school organized an excursion in the third year of high school. The whole grade had to walk up and down the mountain on their feet. It was about 20 kilometers. Many people couldn't recover for a week. Over the past few days, these guards had traveled a lot more than they had traveled on foot. They even had to take turns to keep watch at night. A group of people sleeping in the wilderness. The conditions were really tough. Thinking about himself, as long as he had a card or a mobile phone, he could go on an excursion at any time. But in ancient times, it was almost impossible. The water in the water bag is finished. I don't know if there is a water source nearby. Lucy took a bite of the dry, hard cake. There was no taste in his mouth. The water bag in his hand was empty. The guards sat in twos and threes. They seemed relaxed, but in fact, they were secretly vigilant of their surroundings. I'll ask someone to look for it. Father, go rest in the carriage. Jiang Pengji took the water bag from him and selected a few guards who were in good condition to look for a clean water source. She could choose not to go, but when it came to survival in the wilderness, no one had more experience than she did. She could find water as fast as possible and avoid the dangers lurking in the forest. Her efficiency was unquestionable. Everyone had a few water bags with them. If they drank a little at a time, they could probably last until the next station. Jiang Pengji had a long knife on her waist. The blade was straight and sharp. If it weren't for her delicate face and short stature, she would have looked valiant and heroic. She raised her hand and chopped the bushes around her with the knife, clearing a relatively clear path. There's a stream half a mile ahead. Jiang Pengji said with certainty. It's not winter now. Snakes, insects, rats, and ants are active. Before she finished her sentence, she suddenly turned her wrist and held the black knife in a backhand grip. The blade and the sword deeply pierced into the tree trunk behind a guard. The guard was so scared that his body stiffened. His forehead was covered in cold sweat, and he didn't dare to move. Because she had walked a lot, her breathing was a little heavy. It's a poisonous snake. She pulled out the knife with a clang. At that moment, everyone realized that the tip of the knife was stained with blood. A poisonous snake with a triangular head and a brown body was nailed to the tree trunk. It was still in the posture of exerting force before it died. If it weren't for Jiang Pengji's quick action, the snake's poisonous fangs would have bitten the guard's neck. Be careful. Jiang Pengji put away the knife. Her expression was still cold, but it gave people an indescribable sense of security. After stumbling for another half a mile, they heard the sound of flowing water. The troops looked at her with awe and admiration. Go get some water. Hurry up. Jiang Pengji stood on a huge rock by the stream and looked into the distance. She didn't find anything unusual. The guards heard her and immediately took down the water bags hanging on their bodies. They squatted by the water and filled it with water. Sans Hisongshi Ningshi, the ancient water source is not polluted. It looks really clean. Nongfu Shangquan Yudiangshuan, it looks clean, but it doesn't mean it's really clean. If you drink it directly, you might get diarrhea. Who knows how many microorganisms are in it? If you drink it, you might be infected by parasites. I think it's safer to boil it first. Jiang Pengji wouldn't be so careless even if the audience in the streaming room didn't remind her. In fact, every time she fetched water, she would ask someone to boil it in the pot and then put it back into the water bag. Lang Jun. While she was reading the comments to kill time, a guard suddenly ran to her with a bloody coat in his hands. What happened? Jiang Pengji looked at the bloody coat that had been soaked in the water and took it. It was a cloak worn by an adult man. The material was exquisite. It was not the coarse cloth or linen that ordinary people usually used. Where did you find it? There were a few cuts on the cloak, and fresh blood was still burning. In other words, the owner of the cloak had been killed not long ago, and he was nearby. Lang Jun, when we were collecting water, the cloak floated down from upstream. Jiang Pengji looked at the cloak, and her eyes flickered. The atmosphere in the streaming room also fell into a strange silence. They all hoped that Jiang Pengji could go over and take a look. Maybe she could even save a life. But they didn't even need to think to know that the owner of the bloody clothes must have encountered bandits who committed murder and robbery in the deep mountains and forests. Or maybe they were being pursued by their enemies. If Jiang Pengji went there, she might be in danger. Kindness was a good quality, but it was not good to bring danger to strangers or the people around you. That was called St. Mary's disease. Coincidentally, the system's voice rang in Jiang Pengji's ears. It had been pretending to be deaf for a long time. Cheng Cheng, a friend of Meng Zhan from Meng County in Tsang Prefecture. He is currently in an unknown danger. Please save him in half an hour. Once the mission is completed, the host will receive the reward of full breasts. Raise your wrists high and turn around, and your breasts will cover your clothes. If you fail, you will receive a level 6 electric shock as punishment. Please consider carefully and carry out the mission as soon as possible to prevent the target from dying. It was another real-time triggered mission. Hee, this time it was a level 6 electric shock. Jiang Pengji was speechless. System, you've been obedient for months. Why did you suddenly appear out of nowhere and cause trouble? What did a human do? Lang Jun, do you want me to go and take a look? The guard asked in a low voice. He was afraid that his voice would attract the attention of the thieves. No need. You go and tell the others to be quiet. Don't let the thieves find out and cause trouble. Jiang Pengji's face was cold. She threw the bloody cloak on the ground without even looking at it. Obviously, people with discerning eyes could tell her decision from her reaction. Yes, I understand. As the saying went, it was better to avoid trouble. There were only a few people who would stand up for injustice. As the guards who were responsible for Lang Jun's safety, they didn't want any unnecessary trouble to happen. Some of the viewers in the streaming room were very anxious. They typed and scolded Jiang Pengji for being cold-blooded and heartless. Some of them could understand it rationally, but they were disappointed emotionally. They wanted to see a streamer who was righteous, not selfish and cold-blooded. At that moment, the system's voice came out. The system gritted its teeth. Don't tell me you want to refuse again. Host, if you don't listen to me, you will definitely regret it. Jiang Pengji sneered secretly. I won't do the mission. What can you do to me? The system said, level 6 electric shock punishment. Aren't you afraid of death? Will you let me die? Jiang Pengji asked secretly. The system choked and said angrily, you don't have to refuse the mission just to spite me. You're wrong. I won't save him just because he is Meng Zhan's best friend, Jiang Pengji replied coldly. The system, I quit. This host is too hard to deal with. I know she hates real-time missions, but does she have to go against me like this? About 10 minutes later, the guards had filled all the water bags. Jiang Pengji said to the crowd, let's go. The system kept trying to stop her in her mind. Jiang Pengji, are you really not going to save him? The viewers in the streaming room are throwing rotten eggs at you. As a streamer, you should create a positive image. If you don't save him today, you will lose fans. Shut up. Jiang Pengji spat out coldly. Her expression was very cold. The system was furious, but it couldn't change Jiang Pengji's mind. It could only snort angrily. At that moment, the guards realized that Lang Jun was leading them to another path. Lang Jun. We're going the wrong way. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.